Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Tetracast. This is RPG Site's weekly podcast. You know what this is. I'm your host. My name is Brian Vitale. Joining me, I've got the usual crew. We have Josh Torres.
Hi, hello.
We have Adam Vitale.
Hi, hello.
We have James Galizio.
Hi, hello.
And Chow Minwoo.
Hi, hello.
It doesn't sound right when Chow says it.
Okay. I wasn't expecting that, but now I'm grinning like an idiot. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Tetracast. It's the middle of January. We've all been already very busy here at the start of the year. This is going to be a little bit of an interesting kind of news dump episode of the podcast. We are all very busy playing a lot of upcoming games and a lot of release games for early in the year. We're kind of limited in what we can talk about this week, but we have some people that are still playing through the Grand Blue Fantasy Relink demo. We talked about that last week. We've had a few other kind of surprise early access launches that we'll talk about this week for some games that have kind of hit the zeitgeist out of nowhere, and a few other non-RPGs that we'll kind of spend some time talking about here in the opening section of this podcast. And then, of course, we have the Xbox Developer Direct, some news coming out of that we'll make sure we touch on in the second part of the podcast. But starting out, we're going to start out with something that Adam's actually been playing, and I've been actually kind of watching him play for in preparation for one of the biggest releases early in this year. So Adam has been playing through the original Dragon's Dogma. And of course, if you've been following the news at all, you know that Dragon's Dogma 2, the long-awaited sequel, was finally revealed in the last year and is coming out in not too long. So, Adam, we're going to let you have the floor to start out. And I think that this is kind of interesting because I know for me, it's been a while since I've played Dragon's Dogma. I remember having some really fond memories of it, and I've got some, core vibes that I want the sequel to hit. But some of like the moment-to-moment gameplay, I was a little bit rusty on. So I think this is kind of a cool opportunity for you to talk about you playing the game for the first time in preparation for the sequel, what you think about it with your, you don't have any rose-colored glasses, and what you're expecting out of the sequel, and all that information like that. So we'll go ahead and hand the floor over to you to talk about your experience with the original Dragon's Dogma.
Yeah, I'm playing the original Dragon's Dogma, the one that came out on PlayStation 3 in 2012. No, I'm not.
Mm-hmm. That was not the Dark Arisen.
Are you just making fun of like the way I was?
You're like, these are the original, not Dark. I'm joking.
Well, Dark Arisen came out like right after the original, so I always think of Dark Arisen
a year
as
later.
Like baked in. Like I don't think of it as an add-on anymore. I think of that as just part of the game. Anyways,
yeah. So I'm playing and if you remember, like the PC version came out like 4 or 5 years later, right? It took a while.
The Switch version randomly after that.
I forgot it came to Switch momentarily.
Like in 2019.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm playing the PC version of Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen. So yeah, while you mentioned that I think literally everyone else on this podcast is playing an upcoming RPG, one of them, there's a lot. I'm the only one who's not. But Dragon's Dogma has been a game that I've always been interested in. And Dragon's Dogma 2 looked cool. I'm like, okay, that releases in March. I don't have a lot of time. I need to play the first game. So, the first part of January is a little bit quiet. So I'm like, okay, this is the perfect time to play through Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen on PC. So, this game, I had heard a lot about it. And one of the things I had heard about it is that it doesn't explain a lot of things early on. In terms of like what different systems do, what different stats mean, how the pawn system works and all that. Now, luckily, I'm playing the game a decade late, so all of these resources are online to kind of explain these things. But yeah, going into the game, it's sort of there's a cold open like prologue event, and that's more of a story thing than anything else. But then it really just sort of just dumps you in this game and like pick a class, make a pawn. You're going this way, and you're kind of like, okay, I'll go this way. And you kind of have to learn things just by practice, which we've talked about before in other series. I actually sort of like light tutorial games, but I have to admit, having all these like wikis and resources that I can look up things that are confusing to me are nice. But yeah, so Dragon's Dogma, obviously the most unique component of the game, I would say, is the pawn system, and that's tied pretty heavily into the vocation system. And now, a lot of games have classes, but this game has this sort of combination of you pick and build your character's class, and then you pick and build a class for basically sort of like a sub character, your pawn, and then you can summon like the pawns of other players. And I actually, one of the pawns that I found was yours, Brian, because you're on my friend list, and it's like he's like a max level pawn, and the game will allow you to do
I
that.
don't remember anything about how I set him up, but I'm like, all right. I hope
He looks like the Lord of the Rings Lich King or Witch King or whatever it is. The what are those things are called? The Ring Seeker guys. And that's what your pawn looks like. I don't know if you remember that at all. And
Lord of the Rings fan over here.
I'm not a huge
either.
Lord of the Rings fan. You know, the ring guys, ring wraiths, the king one. He looks like that one.
Yeah, okay.
And the other pawn I picked up I actually learned later was Zax.
Nice.
And he's also max level. So I'm playing the game on hard mode, which very briefly, hard mode is hard, but you get like more experience and money. So I was reading up, and apparently it was suggested like if you can start on hard mode and just survive for a while, it ends up actually being like optimal because you get more EXP and more money, so you can kind of it's a little bit more flexible. I'm like, sure, I'll do that. But in order for me to get through hard mode as like a level 1 character, I had to rely on your max level pawn and Zach's max level pawn, which is sort of, I understand, like maybe my experience of the game is a little bit weird in terms of I'm a wimp, like picking away people with arrows doing no damage while I have these two basically godly pawns just destroying everything for me. But I'm just playing this game academically. I just wanted to see what it's like. But the game allows you to do that, so I'm doing that. Anyways, the pawn and vocation systems are pretty cool, and there's some of the usual things that you expect with these sorts of class systems in terms of like you level up a certain class, and then you can kind of get into like an advanced version of that class with maybe a certain tilt on how their skills are set up and whatnot. And then you can learn augments that are basically passive skills that you can transfer between classes, so you can do some sort of cross-classing, character building, coordination sort of things. And then this game has a lot, and I mean like a lot of equipment, like different types of equipment that you can get, and a lot of it is unique to certain classes, so you have to be very like thoughtful in terms of like, okay, if I'm this class and I can't use these pieces of equipment, I have to use these pieces of equipment and these weapons. And since there's a lot to choose from, there's a lot to kind of manage there. And all of that sort of classing, character building, that sort of stuff is all really cool. And the fact that you sort of have to do it twice with your main character and your pawn is also really cool. And then the pawn system itself, there's sort of an AI, and by AI I sort of mean like the old use of the word AI, system in place where like they will learn about like the different sorts of monsters you fight and also the quests. And I was actually confused at first, like what does this mean, like a pawn is learning about a quest? But what that means is when that pawn is summoned into like another person's game, they'll actually just point out like, hey, we need to go this way, or I know what we need to do in this quest. We need to talk to this person. Like they'll literally say that. So like your pawn and Zach's pawn would like clue me in on how to complete quests. And I think it also works with like the New Game Plus mode this game has also. And like, oh, that's kind of neat. Like your pawns will kind of just give you hints and tips based on how a quest works. But not only that, but also like if you're fighting a griffin, they'll know this griffin is weak to fire. Actually, I don't know if griffins are weak to fire, but they know what elements creatures are weak to, and also like which part of the animal is like most vulnerable. They'll learn that as you fight them. And so there's some cool like systems in place there where your pawns are basically teaching my pawn how to fight enemies, and you could actually see it in motion, like attacking not a chimera from the back to cut off a snake tail. Like you'll see them doing that, and there's just some cool stuff there. The game itself, I mean this generously, it sort of feels unfinished in a way. And I think based on what we've seen and what I've heard about like design documents and things that have come out since the game's release, that's pretty much evident that there are a lot of places, thoughts, storylines, even maybe whole races in the game or that were conceived for the game that weren't ever actually implemented. So I'm kind of going through this story, which has to do with a dragon shows up and I guess steals your heart and is causing a bunch of havoc, and you basically are tasked to eventually take them down. And then there's like a cult in the game called Salvation that is doing nefarious things, and there's some other things, but it kind of feels sort of thin in terms of like story and also like the main questing and things like that. But it doesn't bother me too much. How do I put this? Dragon's Dogma sort of feels like it has a high ceiling, a high potential that it never really reaches, but it also feels like it was sort of ahead of its time in some of its design and some of its structure. And having come out 10, 11, 12 years ago or whatever. So I guess
some of the stuff that you were discussing about the pawns was cool as shit 12 years ago.
Right.
It's pretty damn cool now.
Yeah, and so I think that's where basically people like Alex or you guys or others I've seen have been, clamoring for a Dragon's Dogma 2 for a while, because it feels like this game didn't quite. I'm most of the way through it. I think I'm near the end, although I haven't touched some of the Dark Arisen content yet. It feels like it doesn't quite meet like its potential, but that's where Dragon's Dogma 2 comes in, right? Where it's like, all right, this is the vision, hopefully being, crafted and delivered this time to meet that full potential. So I think I've started to understand, playing through the original game here, its systems, its stories, its quests, like the potential, and how that hopefully Dragon's Dogma 2 basically nails it, with higher budget, maybe less. They don't have to cut as much in terms of the vision, so that's really cool.
Yeah, it's also just like, it's also fascinating how Dragon's Dogma 1, what it managed to achieve on its own merit, like not just like, I'm sure they had to compromise, a good chunk of what the original vision was, but like how were they able to still like get everything together for such like at the time very limited hardware, because this was targeting PS3 360, and they still managed to craft like a pretty robust open world, and was able to like keep itself together without it completely falling apart on a technical level.
I would say that
it manages to keep itself together. I wouldn't say it's a broken game.
No, but I do remember that Dragon's Dogma was one of those PS3 360 games that ran pretty terribly. Like,
it didn't have the most stable performance, especially when it comes to like PS3, like what did on PS3, especially in its first 4 years.
Anyways,
so
one thing I like about
I'm gonna praise that aspect of it.
What I was saying is, one thing I like about the the characters in this game. There's a handful of characters. There's like Mercedes, there's Madeline, there's Julian, there's a couple of different knights. There's the Princess Duchess girl. And one thing I kind of like about this game is that I've always liked these things. It's pretty low on exposition and dialogue. It's very efficient in it's not a very cinematic game. There are some cutscenes and there is some dialogue, but not much. It's not like a, how do I put this? I just I feel like characters like Julian, Mercedes, and the others I mentioned, they're pretty well established, but it's very efficient in that, you kind of learn about them very quickly. They participate in just a handful of quests, and then that's kind of like all there is to it. But I kind of like that, where they're not just, speaking endlessly or have like a bunch of exposition explaining who exactly everyone is and like every single thing about their character. You just sort of learn like bits and pieces of their characters, and they just kind of pop up here and there. I just did a quest that was basically like a standoff between Julian and Mercedes, and you learn about the different characters, about what they've been doing in the game, in this like quick little, 10-minute quest. And I just think it's sort of cool. And I'm kind of curious to see like how that sort of like how the sort of like cinematic cutscene storytelling dialogue, how that style might transfer to the second game in terms of, do they expand on it? Do they sort of keep it this sort of truncated style? But I kind of like that. I don't know if I'm making sense in terms of how I'm explaining this.
I think it makes sense. You're saying like the cutscenes aren't framed in a way where it's, oh, we have an unknowing participant, the player.
Oh yes.
So we
exactly.
gotta like set up the scene so that everyone's motivation is explained in a very manufactured way. It's like no,
It's a very like you said, it's like almost like an antithesis of like like how cinematic storytelling is, right? It's not like you're not getting a lot of like exposition scenery shots to help set up the mood. It's kind of like very cutthroat in like the direction of a cutscene. It's like
Mhm.
bop bop bop. Okay, then here's what you need to do. Okay, got it.
And I like that the world isn't huge. Like you can actually explore the full world map in this game in, I don't know, let's just say roughly 10 hours. Like that's basically after you playing the game 10 hours, you've pretty much been everywhere. The game itself, like if you go front to finish, I think I'm like 40 hours in and I'm near the end, and that seems to be about normal for the main game. So I heard that like Dragon's Dogma 2 is 4 times the size of Dragon's Dogma 1, which I always sort of like whenever they expand, whenever these developers talk about like how huge everything is, I still feel like, you know what, 4 times Dragon's Dogma still isn't massive, I think, just sort of envisioning it in my head compared to some other games I've played, like, I don't know, Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Assassin's
which is
Creed
huge.
Valhalla.
Yes.
I knew you were gonna say that.
One thing I will say about as someone that has played a bit of Dragon's Dogma 2 at TGS, it's really striking how the world design is very, very different in Dragon's Dogma 2. It's very dense. And I remember asking it to know, and he said that was very much intentional. So I'm actually really excited to see how the rest of that game's world stacks up. So.
Mm-hmm.
I hope it still feels dense and doesn't feel like here's a large 4 times swath of land between these two.
I kind of hope it's not too dense in the sense like I still want kind of like open areas and open fields, because I still think that's like one of my favorite like kind of like areas in the first Dragon's Dogma where it's like oh man, there's like this huge ass field. I can see like the other side of it. Like I can see how big this field is, you know. So yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see how they managed to like kind of structure that whole sequence exactly. Like what are like the hot areas on the map? Let's say like where there's a lot of activity.
Well, we're gonna go from having just the one central hub to 2, so I think that'll naturally help the map feel a lot larger and a lot more varied.
Have you guys been paying attention too much to like the IGN monthly coverage? I've like seen bits and pieces, but I haven't been like,
I see it filtered through like my Twitter feed, like other
Right.
people sharing clips, but I'm not like going to IGN to watch it.
I've seen I've been keeping up with them, like I kind of just like honestly like, oh, I see like it's on my recommendation thing. I'll just go check it out.
I did see that there was an interview with Itsuno, and he mentioned like, I'm not a big fan of turn-based RPGs and grinding. And it's just like, I mean, that's not surprising coming from Itsuno, considering like his gamography, but it's just kind of funny. He's in that camp of like, turn-based.
Disgusting turn-based.
I like
thank God
real
it's a relic
time.
of the past.
I'm sure he's just. People don't take it too seriously. Don't take it too personally. But
exactly.
I just thought that was amusing. But yeah,
Look,
I'm playing through Dragon's Dogma.
Like different stuff.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else I haven't mentioned. It's just got a cool style to it. The game is, you got to remember playing through it like, oh yeah, this was a 2012 PS3 game, so it's kind of ugly, like the models. Compared to like what we get today in a AAA game or whatever. So it's like, oh yeah, this game came out 12 years ago. Some of the character faces and animations are pretty robotic, but that's not really surprising. That's not bothering me. It's just you kind of have to understand that this game, where it's coming from.
What's your vocation? What's your main pawn's vocation?
Okay, so I was originally gonna be a warrior, kind of basic, but then I summoned Brian's pawn and Zach's pawn, and they're both warriors. I'm like, okay, I don't need a warrior. I have 2 godly warriors already, and so I'm like, I'll be a ranger. So I'm now a ranger, or I think, yeah. So the first class is Strider, and then the second class is Ranger. They both use like knives and bows, but I guess Ranger is more focused on the bow skills, where Strider is more focused on the knife skills. So I'm a ranger. I'm basically picking at people from afar. I can actually do a decent chunk of damage at this point in the game now. You have one skill where you can literally shoot 10 arrows at once. And if you hit if you hit a weak spot with that, and if you have like the right element on your weapon, you can do quite a bit of damage. Like Cyclops are weak to electricity. And if you manage to find one without a helmet and hit it in the eye, you can do it. I can almost do like a whole health bar in one shot if you aim it properly. And that leads me to my pawn. I was like, okay, I have 2 warriors and I'm a ranger. My pawn will be a mage or a sage. I think it's mage and sage. Right now, it's mage and sorcerer. Right now, my pawn is a sorcerer, which means they don't have healing skills. They just have a bunch of like attack and support skills. And I was like, okay, so I don't have any healers in my group, but I have a ton of money, so I just like load up on herbs and I just chow down.
Who needs a bug?
I don't need healing. Just give me 100 herbs. I'm fine. But yeah, so they
give my main pawn 5 minutes and it'll one shot everything.
My mage actually, they do spells, but I find that this is maybe like a character behavior thing that's maybe could be improved. Or maybe my pawn is just dumb and hasn't learned it properly yet. When my pawn does like abilities that give my character and my other 2 pawns like elemental like buffs on their weapons, that's the most useful. It's like, yes, I have fire on my arrows now. I'm gonna do way more damage to most things. But then like I'm fighting a phantasm, which is an enemy in the game. They're basically like an elemental spirit, and you can basically not hurt them with regular weapons. You can in small amounts, but not really. And I'm like, all right, mage, shoot fireballs at the phantasm. And they just sort of like sit there kind of like quipping and wandering around. I'm like, shoot fireballs, do something. Because I can't do damage to it, you have to do damage to it. And they eventually will, but it's just kind of like...
They'll give you 2 thumbs up at the first 2 commands.
And there was one time, there was like a lightning phantasm, and then they did a lightning spell. I was like, no, wrong spell, do the other one. But so it's just...
Is it bad? Is it bad if my first thought is like, if only it was Final Fantasy 16, and that wouldn't have mattered?
Anyways, but still, like, I still feel like my kind of overall takeaway is Dragon's Dogma has some really interesting systems and a high ceiling that it doesn't quite reach. But that makes me more excited for the sequel, and it sort of feels ahead of its time, which also makes me feel excited for the sequel. So, yeah, I'll hopefully finish it up in the next week here. I hear Bitter Black Isle, which is sort of like the Dark Arisen area, is... Because the main game, once I got past sort of like the opening part of it, wasn't too bad. Granted, I'm relying on god-level pawns. Although my character is pretty sufficient on their own now. But I hear Bitter Black Isle, which is the DLC Dark Arisen area, is like actually pretty difficult and somewhat frustrating. Hopefully in a good way. So like I have yet to do that, but I'm kind of waiting on that until after I sort of complete the main game first. But yeah, it's a very cool game. Glad I played it. Excited for the sequel.
You're not going to cheat on the sequel, are you?
Well, I highly doubt anyone's gonna have a max level pawn at launch day, but it's not cheating if the game allows me to do it.
No, but no, it's been fun to like. I've been watching you play it as you've been streaming it, and then of course talking about it with you here. You know, it's getting me more excited for the sequel because some of the details about some of the quests and characters that you had mentioned, I had kind of forgotten about. So it's been kind of cool to kind of brush up on that without having to play it myself. So thanks for doing that.
I've heard some people like confused about like, is it a sequel? Is it like a retelling of Dragon's Dogma? Is it like an alternate world?
It's a Final Fantasy type situation where it's like an alternate, like it's a similar world, but it's different. That's what I've been told.
So there's no like canon timeline here where Dragon's Dogma takes place at this point and Dragon's Dogma 2 takes place at this point.
The best way, this feels slightly reductive, but going off of what Itsuno has told me and also others, like the most recent IGN review, and then looking at the original design documents for Dragon's Dogma 2 is straight up looking to be like, we didn't get to put in a lot of the stuff from the original design documents we wanted to. We're just going to make this game again and try and cram as much of that in there this time.
But probably no shared characters, or maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like you can look at specific things in the design document, like the map, and also some of the like story progression stuff, and you can line it up with things that are quote unquote new in Dragon's Dogma 2, and it's like, okay, this is just straight up them being like, we were not able to finish the game last time. we are finishing the game this time. And it
Yeah.
feels reductive to say that, but they've even like Itsuno said things that are basically along those lines anyways. So
Well, I think that's kind of like the genius of the game, like Josh said earlier. Like we're talking about how this is the fully realized version of Dragon's Dogma, but Dragon's Dogma, when it was an excellent game, it doesn't feel unfinished. It just feels like it has the potential to be more. I guess maybe that's splitting hairs, but it makes me really excited. For
I think I said
second game.
earlier, this is more generous than I mean, but it sort of feels unfinished, but not necessarily in a bad way. It's more like
I
guess
guess
the positive way to put it is like potential there. That
I'm just coming at someone who played it at launch, the original PS3 version, no Dark Arisen yet, and didn't look at the design docs of the game. Obviously, on day one, I was like, "This is a pretty cool fucking game."
yeah.
With that, we'll go on into the second game that we have listed on our podcast doc, which is not an RPG, but it is a recent release that I believe a couple of us here have either started or finished. And that is Another Code Recollection. So this is a game I am not familiar with. In fact, before the podcast, James and Chow were kind of teeing me up on what this game actually is. So for the sake of our audience, we might need to repeat that because I didn't remember if this was a DS game, a Wii game. Is this a remaster, a combination? We'll go ahead and start off with James, and then we'll tag in Chow as appropriate. So, like, what is Another Code Recollection, and have you played the original, or is this your first time playing the game, James?
Okay, so Another Code Recollection is a remake of the original Another Code games on the DS and Wii. If you haven't heard of Another Code, you're probably an American like I am, and you might be more familiar with Trace Memory, a very early DS game that was a bit of a cult classic. That was called Another Code in Japan and Europe, and it did get a sequel on the Wii that, in typical DS Wii era Nintendo of America fashion, did not get localized to North America, was localized in Europe. So Another Code Recollection is a remake of both of those games with some changes, especially in the second game, put together into one package. And when I say it's a remake, because those games were on the DS and Wii, especially the first game, a lot of changes. Because a lot of those puzzles, because it was a bit of a puzzle game, it was a Japanese-style adventure game. A lot of those puzzles made use of the DS hardware, so for obvious reasons, when they decided to remake these games for Switch, a lot of those puzzles are completely different. Completely different.
That totally makes sense. I'm kind of like the oddball that I only played the sequel. I did play the original like a little bit, just like to boot up the intro after beating like the sequel on the Wii. But if you start with a sequel like I am, like the oddball, it kind of spoils like the major plot twist that occurs in the first game immediately. So I guess at least good thing that new audience don't have to suffer from this problem now.
Yeah. So it's funny because the way that this remake works is it's a remake of both games. It very much kind of ties them together into like one game this time. Like you still have, okay, this section is the Another Code to Memory section, then this one is Another Code Journey into Lost Memories, or Journey Through Lost Memories. I forget the exact title. Those two sections are separate, but you can only start from the first game. You can't immediately skip into the second game, and you don't get the credits roll until you finish the second game. So, like, I do a thing where I try and beat at least 52 games a year. I still listed them as separately because they were originally separate games when they originally released, so I felt like it was fair to do that. But for the purposes of this collection, they're treating it as one large narrative, which is interesting. And I guess I'll just say that this was the only time I've played these games. I remembered reading about Trace Memory in like Nintendo Power, and I was always like, yeah, that seems kind of neat. Maybe I'll try it one day. And then by the time I would have had a chance to, copies of that were pretty hard to come by, and I just never got around to it.
So that's interesting, right? Because my memory of Trace Memory on DS was And there's nothing about the game's quality. I don't know how popular it was in the West. I was just like someone who like kind of browsed game stores, just like willy-nilly without any thought, right? And I always distinctly saw this memory in bargain bins at game stores. And I don't know why. I was just like, oh, it's that game again. Because it had like a very distinct, title and cover. And I was like, oh, that's in a bargain bin again.
Yeah, it was
I bought
probably
it
one of
from a
those
pawn shop
things.
for like
Yeah.
$5.
Yeah,
It's
I don't know
probably
how
one
it
of
was.
those things. It's probably one of those things where a lot of like really, really niche DS and Wii games had a point where they were like super, super, super cheap. But then once like all of those cheap copies like kind of left the market, suddenly the price skyrockets. It reminds me of like Solitarobo. Like I bought that game when it was like $15. Nowadays, you don't want to know how much that goes for.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah.
So I think it was a similar situation there. But
But yeah, I have no idea like what is it like a cult classic in the West, or I have no just I don't know anything about this game's
I
impact
think the
in the
rep
West.
is like when it came out, it wasn't like as too well received. It was just more like, oh, it's like it's made by the same people from Hotel Dusk, and then they go back and want to play it because they were made by the same company. That's kind of like how I see it. That's for me.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
did you start playing the Switch version, or have you only just played the Wii version?
I only just played the Wii version. I only just got the Switch version yesterday, so I didn't have the time to try it to see how it is. But I played the Wii version. It's actually very good looking for a Wii game. It's actually like one of the best Wii games look when it comes to graphic fidelity over there. I think the thing that I really hated about the Wii version back in the day was like some of the puzzles. It's like it's so easy, but the Wii motion controls are so terrible that it's like you just need to twist this key to unlock this door, and then you can't seem to twist the Wii remote like properly, and the puzzle
okay. So I started playing this game a little bit yesterday. I'm like maybe I don't know, like an hour and a half in, so I'm not too far in. But like one of the earliest puzzles you do
the gyroscope one with
the
the
gyroscope
stool.
with the stool. So okay, so the basic setup is that there's not really supposed like you're good. There's this girl you play. Her name's Ashley, and you go to this island because a father she thought was long dead. Apparently sent her a letter saying basically come here to this island. I'm waiting for you here. So she goes there with her aunt, and her dad's not there on the island, so the aunt goes to investigate where he is, and then she follows after her aunt. And then one of the earliest things when you get explore that island is, hey, here's a lock gate, and then you get an introduction that like, hey, the investigating on nearby items, like underneath like this nearby stool is like this little cage, and then you have to like kind of twist the controller to get a key out, and then like. And it's like one of those like puzzles where you like you have to like tilt the controller one way to tilt the stool one way for the key to slide, and then eventually you have to like slide it in a way so it like goes out through like a little opening.
The acceleration for that is kind of fucked up. That's
It
like
is
the one thing. Like,
yeah, I was like, what the fuck am I doing with my controller?
yeah. So here's the thing and this is one of the few problems. I'm probably going to write I am going to write a review for this. I greatly enjoyed these games. I'm quite a bit. I really did enjoy, especially the narrative and like reading up like some of the changes they made to the second game. I never played the Wii original, but looking at the changes they made, I feel like it probably was for the better because it really resonated with me, and I feel like thematically it better fits the type of series that Another Code is. But man, this game, it doesn't happen often, but every now and then it'll be like, okay, here's a gyro puzzle. And the problem with the gyro is that it feels like you have to kind of overcompensate to get the acceleration going. But then once it gets going, it's like super fast. So you have to react like almost immediately, and you have to overcomp. It is finicky as hell. It is finicky as hell.
Damn, that sounds just like a problem with the Wiimote back in the day.
So there you go. They popularly emulated the Wii remote problem. Great.
I'm glad that I wasn't the only one feeling that problem. So it's like, oh, thank God it wasn't just me.
Yeah, I was like, dude, I I must be like super old or something because this doesn't feel right.
Maybe it's better in handheld mode, but I played it with a pro controller, so maybe it's better if you did in handheld
Yeah,
mode.
maybe
I don't know.
I don't know. But other than that, like I don't know. Like I plan to play, gradually through it. It seems like a pretty interesting game. Um, I one of the things I remember someone mentioning about the DS version when like the remakes were released. I thought this was a really cool puzzle, but it couldn't be emulated obviously on the Switch. It's like one of the puzzle solutions on the DS relied on you like tilting the screen halfway, so it's like standing up because you're relying on like the reflection of like the screen to like show you like the solution of a puzzle. Like it's like relying on like light reflection with the screens to at a right angle to like find the solution. I was like, no fucking way, that sounds crazy. And apparently that was a real thing on the original game in the DS version.
That reminds me of how like so many people got stuck in Zelda Phantom Hourglass back in the day because it's like, what the fuck am I supposed to do here? And it's like you have to stamp the map. Like, how do I stamp the map? You close your DS screen, so you like connect the two like pieces of fabric so that the top screen like gets the seal from the bottom screen. It's like
It just reminded me how creative developers got with the DS, the dual screen mechanic to design their puzzles. 999 was an infamous example of that.
like just turn your DS upside down and start crying.
Yeah, come on.
Well, when I was visiting home for the holidays, my brother was actually working on the Pokedex for Scarlet and Violet, and you still have to hold the Switch upside down to evolve Inky.
Oh, that's funny.
So I haven't done the just this is a tangent, but James, have you played the epilogue for Scarlet and Violet that they added like this month? I haven't played it yet.
I have
don't know
not
what.
played it yet. I have not.
All right.
I'm basically like tapped out of Scarlet and Violet now.
That's kind of where I'm at. I was like, maybe I'll boot it up, and then never did. Eventually.
Yeah. But yeah, another code Recollection is very good, except for when it asks you to use motion controls, in which case it is maybe not so good. But in a way, that kind of just is.
It's faithful.
Yeah, it's like when you're remaking a game, and so much of this is different because obviously the DS game is completely different now. It's like ground up remake, same with the Wii game, but you still get those feelings of the DS and Wii in pockets when you play through this, and it's like, oh man, it's not the same thing, but it has the vibes.
Some people call it soul.
Yes, this game has soul.
The soul and vibes
absolutely do not work. Yeah, absolutely do not look up the credits until you've actually played the game yourself. But this game's like credit sequence is probably the most soulful credit sequence I've seen in like a cool minute. It's so good. It's so good.
I remember the Wii credits. It was actually like a pretty memorable scene, and you feel like, oh, do I get more? And then you're like, oh wait, never mind, it's over.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm glad that Nintendo has been like greenlighting these sorts of remakes of their like classic adventure game catalog. I did really enjoy Famicom Detective Club, and I did enjoy this. And it's like they're hopefully like Hotel Dusk and like the sequel gets a similar situation because it's very much the same thing where like North America only ever got Hotel Dusk and didn't get the sequel that was on the DS. So it'd be neat if they ended up doing like a ground up remake for those as well. Though I don't know how well this will sell. Hope if it sells well, I feel like this game, the only way it would be successful is if it did well in Japan, because I just have a feeling it's not going to sell super great in like North America and Europe, which is a shame.
I think it's also just like it's one of those things. Like I barely heard about this game and it was like announced, and like I didn't know it was coming out until like this week. I was like, oh, that's right. And I feel like it also just hasn't been marketed too well either.
Granted, I don't think.
I don't think it has a large audience. Yeah, I don't think it has a large audience.
Yeah, I don't think the extra marketing would have helped too much. I feel like they did just enough to make people that would want to know about it. And they're letting like word of mouth handle the rest, which I can't even blame them for it. And I will say the remake looks really good, but you can tell that they were very smart with the budget of it. Like it looks good, but you can tell that it's not like a it's not like
it's a very
huge.
limited. They're
Yeah.
working on very limited like resources, like because like they spent a lot on the visuals, but like the actual like movement of like the character feels stiff and somewhat slow. But like,
Yeah,
I also
I love
heard the second game.
Yeah, I will say one thing. If you're going to play this remake, very first thing you're gonna want to do, go into the options, set the camera speed to like at least twice the default, probably more, because the default camera
I put it like 70 to 80 like immediately.
the default camera speed is so bad, so bad. It's like
but for me that's like standard in any game though. Like usually I put like the default like movement speed of the camera like usually like 2 to 3 notches up from like the default.
Yeah.
So this one is just even more.
Yeah,
I
it's
was
like
just gonna say, like the storyline was didn't they cut down the second game storyline by a lot or something like that? I heard
they
that
got rid of some of the padding, and they very heavily rewrote a few characters. So if you're coming into this having played the second game and expecting a 1-to-1 remake for the story, that is not what you're going to get. Now, most of the people I've talked with that have played through the story so far, like I know Colin did because he wrote the review for Nintendo Insider, and like a few other folks, generally people seem to agree so far that the changes they made to the second game are good, but they are different. So I can't blame anyone that ends up disappointed in that. So just a heads up.
Thank you, James, and also to Chow for talking about your time with the remaster for Another Code Recollection and the original DS and Wii games. Not really an RPG, but kind of in the same sphere of adventure game, puzzle games that we sometimes cover on this site. The third game that we have listed here, I must have been living under a rock because I didn't hear about this game until this week, and now it feels like it's everywhere. We're talking about Palworld. So I'm going to just very, very, very quickly tee this up and then hand it over to Josh, who might actually know what we're talking about. This game released in early access. My understanding is that it's like a hardcore monster catcher like open world game that's already like sold 2 million early copies. And one of those is Josh.
I got peer pressure to do buying this game. Since
this is not a game we've covered on the site. It's not a game that I was aware of that was releasing this month.
There's a game I wasn't expected to even like buy or like or anything. I was like, oh, okay, I'll give it a shot, and then
I will say
the same boat.
Yeah, I will say one thing. I feel like it's worth noting is that as we are recording this podcast, like as of right now, Palworld is getting into some shit where it's like apparently the developers have admitted to using like generative AI in their other games to try and like skirt copyright, and now people are like looking at a bunch of these like pals and seeing
there's definitely I don't know if there's like it's like one-to-one plagiarization, but there's definitely similarities between some of these PAL designs and Pokemon. Like I can't speak to their development process, so what can I say? I don't know anything about how they developed this game. I know that like their last game was Craftopia, and that didn't it was that Craftopia in the same way in a similar manner is like it's kind of like a lot of chefs in this in the same kitchen where like it tried to be everything. It definitely ripped off Breath of the Wild plus Fortnite plus Genshin plus name your favorite farming simulator. Like it definitely tried to be everything. So in terms of like this Palworld news of like they might have done something in the development of these pals that like might have taken something for Pokemon. I can't speak to that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, if anything concrete comes on that, we'll keep it on the back burner to make sure we bring it up. Once something is, if anything, definitive comes out of that. But good to bring up as.
Yeah, I just figured it was worth at least mentioning. So
yeah. So, but this game's like really like in terms of like its gameplay, it's definitely not like Pokemon with guns. Like even though on its face, obviously that's what a lot of the marketing was. There's more akin to like something like an Ark, uh, Survival Evolved or some shit, where it's like it's very much like you're in like this kind of open world, and you kind of start out with nothing. You kind of look like a cave person, and you start out by like, hey, hitting trees, hitting rocks, and building a base. And then the loop of the game is you basically catching these pals and then having them work at your base to generate resources and meeting goals to further upgrade that base so you can build more advanced stuff to uh, generate more resources and to give you new equipment like new armor, new weapons, new options. So eventually, you'll go from like, clubs to bows to spears, eventually, obviously, to guns. And then so you kind of have to work up technologically uh, through base advancement on that. So I think it's just like I put like 5 to 6 hours into it. I wasn't sure how I was gonna like really like it, but I think it has a really enjoyable gameplay loop, especially when you're just chatting with friends, like in the same server. So like I'm playing a server with some friends, and they're kind of doing their own thing. I'm kind of doing my own thing, and now I've now got into this like visceral loop now where I'm trying to find this like specific pal that you can mount. So and I unlocked like the harness to mount it, but one of the traits that this pal can have is like swift or run or something, and like it goes way faster if you mount that same pal but with that trait. So now I'm kind of like doing this fucking thing that like Pokemon people do, where like I need to capture this specific pal with this specific trait, and I'm scouring the world like hunting down this pal and hoping that when I capture it, it has that trait on it because it goes so much faster if it has that trait. Um, and it has those similar open world mechanics that Breath of the Wild does, where it has the stamina, like the semicircular stamina meter for climbing up stuff. You have the hang glider, and then like obviously some of these pals you can ride throughout the world, and even like the flying ones, you can build a harness for them to fly on them. But you need to have like you need to have reached like the technology free tier to unlock it, and then so you can craft a harness um, for it. So I mean, it just has like a really satisfying loop if you're into the type of those like survival games, and base building management. Like right now, I have a very simple base that I have some of these pals working on a farm, mining rocks, um, uh, chopping trees down, and then if they get tired, I have hot springs for them to go chill in. And the way I had to make these hot springs was like, so one of the ingredients for the hot springs was like it's called pal fluid, and the way you get pal fluid is sometimes it drops from like pals you kill out in the wild. So the implication is the hot springs are filled with like the blood of your enemies, pretty much. It's like, all right, cool.
Hardcore.
Uh-huh. And then as you see in the trailers too, you can eventually unlock like partner actions for pals. So some of them like you can like mount as like you can pick them up and like they have like a machine gun that like they have, or some of them have like maybe missiles on them. Um and one of like the upgrades for one of mine is like, hey, you can use this instead of like the shitty hang glider that you have, you can like use this pal instead to be your hang glider. And I assume they'll be a more effective pal. So it is, it's nothing like revolutionary in that field of like how Arc does it, of like this resource gaining resources, building up a base, and meeting objectives to like build a better base to get more advanced technological trees, and then eventually you can like go up to these towers, and I assume fight whatever like the gym leader equivalent is in the game for these boss battles. But it's just kind of like an easygoing game to kind of like chill in. Doesn't have to be like anything like super like violent or torturous. And I'm sure there's be a lot of like discussion of like or there already is of like how much is this ripping off Pokemon? How much are they doing this? It's like sure there might be like there might be some maybe shady practices in development that I didn't know about when getting to this game. I mean, hopefully developers can clarify on that and sort that shit out. I can't speak for them. I'm not their fucking PR person. I'm just kind of got peer pressure to buying this game and playing it. I'm like, hey, it's having a pretty fun time. Okay, what can I say?
Is the game completely sandboxy, or is there a story that you're strung along for, or how does that work? Like
It's pretty
progression?
sandboxy. It's not like super narrative driven. I mean, like the narrative is like this. The one of the first NPCs that you can talk to is like, this place is like a living hell with all these pals or whatever. But there's not really a story to it. Like maybe they'll add one down the line because it's still there's still early access. There's still day one early access, not actually the full release
Right.
of it. There seems to be a lot of content in it already, but it's not like story driven like Pokemon is, right? Where hey, you have a very distinct characters and distinct objectives to work towards. This story driven sort of deal. This is more sandboxy.
And as of at this moment, based on the Steam stats, 700,000 people are playing right now.
Yeah, that's not even
At this
counting Game
time.
Pass people. Also, yeah.
Oh, that's a
So
good point. Yeah. So,
yeah,
pretty crazy, and we'll kind
yeah.
of track and see how long this fad. Is it a fad? I guess I won't declare it's that
I mean,
right away. But
yeah. I mean, I got my $25 worth or whatever. It's like 25
mhm.
$26 on Steam. And I feel like I already got my money's worth on this game. As I'm waiting for bigger releases, incoming. But it's this kind of a fun time waster, just to kind of fiddle around with and interacting with their own version of Pokemon, obviously, and how they utilize them. And some of it is pretty clever. I will say, some of it is pretty interesting uh how they kind of use distinct Pokemon features and how that would if let's say if Pokemon were in the real world. Obviously, if Pokemon were real, they would be put to work. How would the real world put them into labor? Let's say, if, based on the features, their characteristics, and this game has some ideas about how they would do that. If Pokemon were real.
Well, it's a curiosity that we all, when this game started blowing up. So, kind of good to get a brief look in here to at least give it a quick look in and see if it has any sort of staying power or if what it comes out over the next week based on the accusations regarding the art. The last game that we have listed here before going into the news is something that we talked about either last week or the week before. We had obviously the new trailer for the upcoming expansion for Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail, and James and Chow had mentioned that there was probably going to at least be one more somewhat major-ish moderate patch before then, and that I guess just came out in the last week, patch 6.55. So, James, for us that don't play Final Fantasy 14, what is it? Is this the last major pre-Dawn Trail patch, or is this a
Yes.
series of patches that are leading up into it? Okay, and then just lay it down. What does this patch do to prepare players for the new expansion coming out this summer?
So basically, the way that 14's patch cycle has worked for years at this point is that in the lead up to a new expansion, obviously 14 has the whole patch cycle where you have the point 1 patch, the point 2, the point 3, the point 4, and the point 5. The point 5 patch for each expansion is split into two halves. The first half will have the dungeon and the trial that's expected, and then a couple of the last bits of quests will be segmented off for a later patch closer to the release of the next expansion. And that'll be the truly, okay, this is directly setting up what's going to happen next. So patch 6.55 has a bunch of stuff from Dawn Trail, directly setting it up. Kryl, one of the main characters from Endwalker, uses the new Pictomancer job in a cutscene. And literally it's just showing off, yeah, this is going to be a new job in Dawn Trail. There's a new character, Look Lamont. I probably absolutely butchered that, who is a female Rothgar, which is going to be new for Dawn Trail. So it's one of those things where it's just Yeah, it's just a bunch of stuff directly tying into the new expansion. There's like little bits and pieces. We're learning more about the new area you're going to go to in a couple of months, and it's just it's not a very big patch. Most of the major content came with 6.5, which was a few months ago, but it's just
It's
the
kind of like a
last
tease,
bit of
it sounds
yeah,
like.
the last bit of housekeeping. It's basically the devs' way of saying, okay, here's all this information that you probably already saw if you've been keeping track with FanFest and the live letters and whatnot. But assuming that there are players that don't engage with that and only like look at the game itself, obviously you need to have this in the game too to kind of like tie it together narratively. And 6.55 is that like narrative tie from post-Endwalker main scenario into Dawn Trail. So it's not just like it's a seamless transition.
I think this is the
Makes sense.
first time that a patch, like the final patch, didn't end with some kind of ominous feeling. It's kind of like a chill ending. It's just like, oh, like no
The
real
most
ending
ominous
credits.
the most ominous thing is like, hey, so I guess slight spoilers for 6.55, though it's something that like is the entire nexus for Dawn Trail they've mentioned. Someone from the new world, Lamont, wants you, the Warrior of Light, to help her with her like goal to secede the throne from her father, her adoptive father. And there is a little stinger where it's like pretty much all of the scions are ending up in the new world, either directly helping with Lamont or separately. And a couple of the scions seem like they have been tasked by a different person vying for the throne to basically do the same thing, but for someone else. So that's basically the only bit of like tension we have heading into this expansion. And it's very clear from the get-go that there's no like the other scions realize they're going to be working for someone else. They harbor no ill will. They're just like, this seems like it might be interesting. So
It
very
seems like it's more of a localized conflict rather than a world-ending one. They're trying to shrink the
yes.
stakes based on compared to Endwalker, which was like the stakes couldn't possibly be higher.
Yeah, but they said that they made it very clear that they are going to eventually like build the stakes again, but they're like not immediately like hitting like the pedal to the metal. They're trying to make it an understandable like escalation after this reset, so it's not immediate, which is probably the smart way of handling things.
Yeah,
I mean,
for
it took
long-term
like
storytelling, it makes more sense.
so it took like 7 years to get to Endwalker. So we got 7 years for the stake to reach the same levels again, I guess.
Yeah,
And we're in a long ride, I guess.
but yeah,
So
very.
I was going to say last time we had talked about this on the podcast, you had kind of mentioned that you're between patch lull, which is like expected before an expansion. You had an update here. Are you guys going to like? Is there any sorts of tasks in the game that you're going to be logging in before the expansion, or at this point you're just kind of doing the update and then the expansion will come out this summer, and that's when you're going to go all in?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything specific I want to do. Like maybe if I could find a group, I might go back and do the last Savage tier that I wasn't able to because of it dropping a week before Summer Game Fest, so I wasn't able to get a static. And by the time I was actually able to devote time to raiding, Party Finder was a mess. So I was like, I'm not doing this.
I hear too many horror stories that most people can't get past the second fight in this one. Somehow they made the second fight the hardest.
Yeah, so Chow like obviously raids too. Do you think I made the right decision just kind of punting?
Yeah, I say you made the right decision.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Also, one thing that people kind of say about the last tier and an expansion is that for the first two tiers, like the gear means something because it's like, oh, well, you can use that gear in like other content. Like you might, for example, like the first and second Savage tiers for Endwalker, you could use the gear in the ultimate fights, and I did. So you had something to build up towards. There is no ultimate fight that requires Biss from the third Savage tier. There is no content that requires BIS from this most recent Savage tier. So there's not really that much of a reason to do that gear grind outside of the fights themselves, which I'm sure they're great, but it's less of a priority now because it's like, well, there's nothing really at the end of that like grind that really feels fulfilling, because as soon as Dawn Trail comes out, that BIS is going to be worthless anyways, because you're immediately going to have higher like eye level equipment. So
yeah, usually most gears this goes completely irrelevant as soon as the next expansion drops. I also think like that patch, I think like with the new relic weapons, I think it was too easy to get, so they kind of try to overcorrect like Boja from the earlier expansion, and I'm not sure like what is the correct choice here. It's like you had it too easy, so it doesn't feel like an accomplishment anymore. But when you have it too grindy as well, it's also like, oh, like I don't know how they would get something that would satisfy their player base from here.
yeah, but so yeah, not a huge patch, just something to kind of whet the appetite, whet players' appetites as we now have to wait for I'm guessing about 6 months for Dawn Trail to release.
I guess that's the last lingering question. Like, at what sort of event would they announce a release date?
I would imagine that we will probably get a preview event for Dawn Trail in either late April or early May, and that will be when the release date is finalized. So I would not be shocked if give us like 2.5, 3 months, and we'll probably get an invite to whatever that sort of like whatever form that preview event takes. And at that preview event is when they finalize details for what the exact release date for the game is. That would be my guess.
Well, thank you, James and Chow, for covering the current ongoings for Final Fantasy XIV, and we'll obviously report as soon as we know details about the release of the expansion. And that covers us for the games we've been playing section of this podcast, and we'll go into the news section here. The major event this week was the Xbox Developer Direct, but we do have a few other things that kind of came out in terms of like business strategy for both Square Enix and Embracer Group. More on that later. Before we go into the news, there was one feature up on the site that I did want to shout out because it was a major factor of our Game of the Year cast. Adam did formalize his thoughts and wrote up a review for a pretty strong game from last year, Wandering Sword. So, Adam, you don't have to go through in detail because we talked about this game at length on the podcast. But when you took the time on the Game of the Year podcast, I mean, to write up the review, do you have any like concluding thoughts on Wandering Sword when you put your final review together?
It's pretty much, if you listen to our Game of the Year cast, it's pretty much just what I said about it at the time, just sort of written up. Basically, I think it's like systems design is very unique. And that was sort of the crux of my review, where it's like, at a glance, when you look at it, and I know I thought this when I first saw it, it's like, oh, it's just Chinese Octopath or whatever, just, a knockoff. It's a copycat, whatever. But it's very unique in its mechanics. And we talked about this in terms of specifically how you gain abilities and how you like progress your character. I haven't really played a game with a similar sort of system. And the open-ended nature of it is very cool. And those are the things I highlighted and praised. I do think the weaknesses of the game are more in like user interface, its polish, its presentation in some ways in terms of like the user interface and the controls and the menus and the battle can be a little bit weird. And also some of the dialogue and some of the localization is a little bit, it's not terrible, but it's not great. So basically, strong systems and strong mechanical design, maybe a little bit clunkier in terms of like presentation and controls and UI, but still a very, very strong game. And it was one of our top 5 games last year. None of us just had gotten to it at release because it was a really, really busy September and October and November last year. But just wanted to get a review up. And honestly, they're still updating the game. So sitting on it for a couple months wasn't even the worst, option anyway, because they're still updating it. So That's always cool to see that it'll be even better months from now, hopefully.
Like, to be honest, like if Adam or I like reviewed this game on day one when it came out, it probably would have been a different tune because there were some pretty fundamental quality of life changes they added between their launch and
Like no world
around
map.
the game. Yeah, like the just getting around the world map. Yeah.
Go to this town. It's like I have no idea where that is.
Well, you better start learning. You better start drawing out your own map then.
Hell yeah, I've done that before.
Mm-hmm.
It's always fun.
Well, we'll go into the news section of this podcast. First, we'll talk about some new trailers and new details of some upcoming games, starting out with probably the most anticipated game of the year, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. We got a new trailer for this. They're not calling it a launch trailer, but it feels like a launch trailer. It's a titled trailer called Destined for Rebirth, and
They're going to have a launch trailer, and it's just going to like have the ending cutscene in it, because that's what Square Enix does. That's what they
yeah,
do.
probably. Yeah, and the trailer showcases, a lot of events from the original game, a lot of things you could speculate from. Pretty much with every Final Fantasy VII Rebirth trailer, like we kind of state, you could go line by line and go pretty heavy on the speculation about what's going to be the same, what's going to be different. We have no idea in terms of what the game will do based on the ending of the first. They're alongside the trailer. Sorry, I'm just kind of tripping over my words here a little bit. We did get a lot of details about the two new party members. Well, one real new party member with Kate Sith, then also how Yuffie is incorporated into the cast as well. We also got some new renders that are basically up-to-date versions of like renders for Kate Sith. Or Ketchi, Kate Sith. They keep going back and forth.
No.
Kate Sith is what it officially is now. So
no.
Well, what was it? The Western branch said it's Kate Sith, but then
the
one of
Japanese pronunciation is practically the same as or equivalent
Ketchi.
to the Celtic one or whatever.
Reese's cat Moogle doll. Anyways, we know from the earlier trailers that Vincent will be in the game as well as Sid, but the details from this newsletter are just how Yuffie and Ketchi perform in combat. It's got some new English voice actors for characters like Elena, which is kind of nice to see. But yeah, we're just very, very deep into the marketing cycle for this game, and they're gonna have a launch trailer, like Adam said, in all likelihood.
I think it's really funny. It's really funny. The artwork for Yuffie is like for her pose and looking down. It's clearly a callback to like one of like the most iconic Yuffie artworks from the original. But that was set in Wutai. But they don't have Wutai in this game, so they have to make the environment not Wutai. And it was kind of emblematic too, because it's like her like looking over her hometown as well in that artwork. But since
now it's like here's some mountains.
Yeah,
it's something like that with like the Aerith artwork. It's like she sees the Highwind back then, and then it's like she's dead before the Highwind appears.
But just like knowing like the context of that is like it's definitely like less impactful than like the original artwork.
Well, to be clear, these artworks that they're putting out, if you haven't caught on, they're redone versions of classic artworks.
Yeah.
So
yes. Yeah.
There may not be any more meaning to it than that. Just
it's obviously homages, right? But obviously because like this Wutai is confirmed not to be in this installment, they can't incorporate that into her artwork.
But like for the remake, like for the era artwork, they did one version with just the sky, like without the Highwind in the background, and then somehow in Rebirth they added the version with the Highwind in the background, just like the OG FF7. So I don't know. Maybe we'll get to see the Highwind. Maybe.
Well, we'll see. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, it's kind of.
I was gonna say there's one last question I have.
Yeah.
Like the Japanese voice actress for Elena, does she have a voice before? Or no, this is like new.
Was Elena ever in any other media where they were voiced?
I don't know. Maybe
I don't keep up.
She did Advent Children, maybe. I don't know.
Did she appear in Advent Children?
Maybe as a cameo.
I don't remember. I don't fucking remember Advent Children, dude.
But I'm just gonna say it's like like her Japanese voice, like the current Japanese voice for her. I think it's Megumi Toyouchi or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's the same. The reason they got her is because she voiced the main character in Before Crisis, like the girl main character in Before Crisis, which is an older sister. That's why they got her to do the voice for her.
I forgot that was the link between them. That's right.
Apparently, that's the reason. I guess it's like there's a there's a Elena lookalike, which is her older sister that you would never get to see with the same
Well,
voice.
I mean, when she gets added into the mobile game, I
Ever
already forgot
Crisis.
its name, Ever Crisis. And before Crisis gets added into that, then you can go make the link there.
Damn.
I remember once upon a time I was so excited for that, and I'm like,
For
watch
whatever
it on YouTube.
Crisis.
You were
I don't know,
excited
just
from?
I mean,
I kind of
I
was.
think I get, yeah, I get it. Yeah, because there was something novel about, hey, we're gonna put like the compilation of FF7 into like one thing, and it's gonna be ongoing. I was like, okay, there
Yep.
could be something there. Yeah, I feel you.
I think we kind of covered everything that's covered in the trailer and the news post. Like we see glimpses of like the Junon March. There's obviously been some press previews with the fight at the port with the Terror of the Deep or whatever they call it. So that whole fight's already on YouTube from the preview events. Um, I guess one little nugget that people have already kind of called out is that you can play the game with Cloud not in the party. Which
Yeah,
is
right.
a difference from the base game where Cloud always had to be there. So that's kind of matches the more open nature
Good.
of
Cloud's
the
fucking
game.
dead weight. No, just kidding.
Yeah,
Cloud's pretty good.
but yeah, and lots of course, if you go to our news post on the website, lots of new screenshots of the mostly primarily focused on Yuffie and Ketchi in battle. We also got another kind of news post update for the upcoming Unicorn Overlord. So it seems like the posture that they're taking on these updates from Vanillaware is that we'll get kind of like a newsletter update. Then we got that first of what I presume is going to be a series of trailers with that what they call Yosef's Guide, where they talked about the map exploration. So now we kind of got another website update talking primarily about characters and classes and how classes update. And I don't want to boil it down too much, but it really does just have a lot of kind of, at least the way they're describing it is a lot of direct analogs to Fire Emblem. I want to be able to talk about this game in more context than it's like Fire Emblem, but they discuss the way that they tee up how the classes work and how they promote. It is kind of the natural analog.
I mean,
They
ogre
talk about
battle. It's not, I mean, like to me, it's just like not really. I just think of ogre battle.
mm,
So I mean, people are free to do the Fire Emblem comparisons. I'm just like, when you look at gameplay footage, it's like it's anything but Fire Emblem. To be
yeah.
I think the
honest,
reason the
I've
ogre. Sorry,
go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say the reason's like that Fire Emblem's more recent, so it's more.
I mean, yeah, less people have played ogre battle. That's really it's absolutely true. So when people think of tactics, they're like, oh yeah, like Fire Emblem. Oh yeah, like FF Tactics.
Well, I meant more like the class promotion. Is that how it
Mm.
works in Ogre Battle as well with the advanced class using a key item?
You
Yeah,
can promote, yeah, you can promote
Oh,
classes
okay.
there. Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. Like people, that's their only frame of reference. So I'm not gonna hold it again. I think it's really cool to see like some real class variety. They already said that like in this like press update that there's gonna be over 60 classes, and
Mhm.
some of the cool ones they showed, like you have your standard like gladiators and hunters, and you have this cool, and your typical like
Griffin
cleric
Rider.
classes. Yeah, but now you have like some really unique ones, like wyvern knights, griffin knights, but also you have like non-human races like elven fencers and werewolves. Like see, like the werewolf thing is really cool because like they're not even just like typical werewolves. They like to use their claws. They're actually like geared up and like use like weapons. Like, and that's kind of pretty novel and unique to like, yeah, because the typical fantasy depiction of a werewolf is like they're naked and they just go feral, right? So it's kind of seen to see armored werewolves, and then like they have, of course, they have a trait where like they're powered up at night. So
This werewolf's wearing like a kilt, but with a
yeah,
spot for their tail. That's kind of fun.
yeah.
the only
I
werewolf
really
I know is the Darkstalker's werewolf, the Palworld
John
or
Talbane.
so. Yeah, he still has the pants on.
Yeah.
I like the feather bow and feather sword. They're kind of like flying infantry. It's kind of fun.
hmm Yeah,
I'm more curious about the angels. Like, I just wonder how they work because in Ogre Battle, the angels was like really important because in the storyline, like the main villain like kidnapped an angel to basically trying to infiltrate like I think it's like the divine army or some shit. This is like or something like that. I forgot what the exact details were, but I
yeah.
just want to know how the angels work in Unicorn.
I'm curious about since they now like we now have a glance of like, hey, there's actually like maybe a day night system in this game because of the werewolf being powered up at night. Like, how is like state of day? How is the time of day like work in this game? Is it, like real time, like in game, or is it like is it phases of the game the where it's dictated by the plot of like what the state of
I think it might follow the Ogre Battle structure where like every like couple turns, like the night and day cycle just keeps moving. Just
yeah,
I think.
that's what I'm thinking too. Um, yeah, you might be right on that. They also went over like the leaders and having different classes will have different leader effects. Like House Carls, for example, can break gates and barricades more easily with their leaders. So your maneuverability will be key in basically how you structure your squads will be um, obviously going to be always important, but obviously like depending on their leader, their maneuverability in battle will be affected by what kind of unit is in that slot. So like if you're in a slot that like has like a certain leader type, that means that their time before they get into the action will be directly affected, right? So if you want a certain unit to be at the forefront of battles more easily, they might have to compromise with like maybe a weaker leader to get through like obstacles faster. For example.
Yeah, that sounds like an Ogre Battle thing.
Yeah, yeah. Movement types, the infantry, cavalry, and flying. Um, Infantry and cavalry are pretty self-explanatory, but they both can like travel through roads much faster than off terrain. But the main thing is like infantry has a consistent speed between road and off terrain, while cavalry will be faster on the roads, but will get hindered by like forests and stuff. So um, that'll be something to consider. Obviously, flying can bypass terrain, and then as Brian mentioned earlier, they showed off how the promotion works in this game as well, and they gave the example of
The
like a
only the
lane
only
switch
example they
points.
give is the hero, I think,
Yeah,
right? Unless I missed
the,
it.
the Lord, the High Lord
The,
for
the,
the
the
promotion.
Lord becomes a mounted lord, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, like you see in one of the screenshots, you see like all the a lot of other unit types that like are in the promotion
Yeah,
list
and
as
on the
well.
left hand of the window there, yep.
Mm.
So
So yeah, I mean,
auxiliary battles, basically,
mhm.
there are limited or limitless battles against. They call them phantom soldiers, so like lingering phantoms. So you can train up, units that are behind if you want. There's some items that are like the EXP candies in the Pokemon games. So if you have someone that's behind, you can kind of use items to kind of get them up to snuff. They talk a little bit about that. And I think it kind of covers it.
Yeah, and then just some more characters, so some more a little bit more enemies. We haven't actually seen too many of the enemies until now, so it was nice to see more of
Mhm.
them. One of them's like a necromancer, which is cool. Hopefully, that means we can like recruit a necromancer too. I would like a
If I remember
necromancer class.
like in the original Ogre Battle, like the strongest things that you could use is like a ghost or something.
Oh
I think they're
yeah,
like the
yeah.
most broken tier class in the original Ogre Battle.
The enemies get disadvantages when they're attacking them, right? Because of their special properties.
But yeah, we'll see how it
Yeah,
goes. I have
yeah.
one last question for you for when this
Hmm.
game comes out. Do you think this game will start with a turret opening scene and ask you these stupid questions like, "Who will you rescue at the burning house? Your wife, your
I hope
daughter?"
so. I hope so.
To determine their stats.
That'd be so sick, actually. That would make sense if you're trying to determine lane stats. I could fucking see it. Yeah, I don't know. It's pretty exciting. Fuck. The more they like show off of this, it's like, man, it really starts itching that part of my brain of like optimizing like battle parties and like thinking about like, okay, this is what I want specific parties to do and what they consist of. It really scratches that part of my brain.
The next two news bits before we go into more trailers, basically out of that Xbox showing. We're not a business site, and I wouldn't want to pretend to be, but these are kind of like our business slanted focus, talking about some RPG developers and publishers. Adam was the one that put these together, and he does a real good job of really detailing out what is like the history of these news posts and what is the key information and factoid today. We'll start, Adam, with the Piranha Bytes news. So this is information that has kind of been translated from a German outlet. And before I misrepresent it, I'll just go ahead and hand it off to you because we had a little bit of this news last week about like what might have been up, and this is kind of the up-to-date status of Piranha Bytes and Embracer.
All right, so Piranha Bytes, if you're not familiar, they're a relatively small German studio, but they've been around a long time, like 25 years. They are probably most known still for the Gothic series, which is especially popular and almost seminal in Europe as like, key RPGs in the history of RPGs of the, that style. I've never played Gothic, but I know people really praise like their questing and their worlds and like world design and things like that. And then this developer has also made the Arisen series back in like the PS3, Xbox 360 era, as well as the most recent Elex or Elex games, 1 and 2, which you played. And they're a German studio. I think they only have like around 50 people or so in that ballpark, so they're relatively small. And they came out with Elex a couple of years ago. You reviewed it. It seems like your opinion, as well as like the general response to it, was like Elex 1 was, maybe a bit unpolished, but was, surprisingly good in various ways. But Elex 2 kind of felt like a disappointment. But anyways, Piranha Bytes, over the last couple of months, there's already been some murmurs about like what are they doing, because I suppose their YouTube channel had like suddenly gone silent, and they usually had pretty regular updates on there, and also their website no longer was like functional. It just had like their logo and basically like what's going on. And then also there was like a German finance funding site that like delisted one of their projects that was listed on there. Although I guess it's come back since in the time since. But regardless, a German podcast, which is known as The Pod, or it's like gamespodcast.deutsch, it's ran by two editors who were formerly at GameStar, which is basically the biggest German website. We're not German speaking, here, so I don't know anything about these. I've heard of these places, but I'm not very familiar with, their operations. But they ran a special episode of their podcast, these two people. Let me get their names real quick. And they basically were just sharing what they had learned about the situation, because we're sort of assuming that they're pretty well tied into that German games industry. So it is Jochen Gebauer and Andre Peschke. I apologize if I mispronounced your names. And basically what they heard is that Embracer... Let me step back a bit. Embracer actually acquired this studio about 4 years ago, as part of their like long-term like acquisition spree that they were on in the last couple of years.
You're like one of the earliest developers acquired by Embracer before like the big call.
Yes, they were actually acquired by Embracer before they were known as Embracer. It was back when they were known as THQ Nordic. It was THQ Nordic AB, and in order to like not be confused with THQ Nordic, the publisher, which is GmbH, I don't remember what those acronyms stand for. They're Swedish terms. But they basically decided this is confusing. We can't have two different entities called THQ Nordic, so we're going to be called Embracer. That's the holdings company. Anyways, Embracer mandated the closure of Piranha Bytes in November, so a couple months ago, basically saying you have to either get closed and we have to terminate all the employees, or you have to find a buyer, another publisher, someone to take you off our hands, because we are no longer going to be dealing with you, basically. I gather that in German law, it's harder to just terminate people. So there's actually a much longer drawn out process. So what that means is, even if the staff of Piranha Bytes has basically been terminated, they still might like exist in formality or on paper for quite a while as things get like sorted through German courts. There's kind of it's not like the United States where you can just get terminated and you're done. But anyways, basically Embracer said you're either being sold or you're being closed. And that's basically the crux of this, is that there's no project going on right now, apparently, and they're either being sold or they're being closed. I guess THQ Nordic, the publisher, is actually trying to communicate with like the higher ups at Embracer. Hey, let's try to like find a publisher. Let's give us a little bit more time. Let's see what we can do here. And that's kind of the state they're in. Is they're not fully closed yet, but they've already received the termination notices. There's a legal proceedings that's taking place. They're trying to find a buyer. I guess regardless of all of this, a key creative lead at Piranha Bytes, whose name is Xuan Pankratz, again, apologize if I mispronounced your name, already left. So people who are fond of these games and know the studio, it's like, well, they've already lost some key people anyway. But that's basically where we're
They've
at.
lost the creative behind it.
Right. It's worth noting that if Piranha Bytes is sold somewhere else, they apparently may keep the LX brand. Like if they're sold to a different publisher and they're able to make a new game for someone else, apparently they could make an LX3 or ELX3. That's not owned by
It's
Embracer.
ELX.
They could do it. But they don't own the Gothic IP anymore. That's owned by THQ Nordic. And that's
Which makes
actually
sense because the remake.
those
being
developed.
developed.
Switch remasters that came out a couple of months ago. I mean, there's 2 of them last year for the first and second game. Piranha Bytes didn't have anything to do with those. They were done by THQ Nordic and some publishing house or some porting house. And then there's the Gothic remake that's in development at Alchemia Interactive, which is also under THQ Nordic in Barcelona. That's unaffected, no matter what happens to Piranha Bytes. So it's sort of unfortunate because that's kind of what Piranha Bytes is known for and has basically built themselves from is Gothic. And regardless of what happens here, they don't own that anymore. So that's where we're at.
So
Basically.
I don't make sure I understand this. So basically, this could be kind of be a microcosm of what Embracer's whole goal was. They purchased Piranha Bytes. They now own not all, but most of the IPs. They've kind of shuffled it around and they say, hey, you're working on a Gothic remake, and now we no longer need Piranha Bytes.
Well, also, I actually forgot to mention, I have this in the news post here. Last summer, and this is not new news, so you probably have heard this before, Embracer was working on getting funding from various places, and they last summer, I think it was June, they announced, or was it May? Anyways, last summer they announced that one of their funding deals that was going to be $2 billion United States dollars just fell through. It didn't happen. And we learned later, according to reporting by Axios, that that was from the Saudi-backed Savvy Gaming Group, which of course they have tons of money, and a lot of other considerations in place there. But that didn't happen. And it seems like as a result of that, they announced a restructuring, which basically they said outright in an open letter, this has to do with reduction of staff and possibly studio closures. And since then, so this is since last June, they have fully closed Volition, that's the Saints Row people, Free Radical, that's the Time Splitters people, Campfire Cabal, they did some narrative games. So those 3 studios are completely closed. And in the case of Volition, they were pretty long standing, and they don't exist anymore. And then there have been layoffs at 3D Realms, Slipgate Ironworks, Fish Labs, Asmodee, Beamdog, Gearbox Publishing, Rainbow Studios, Cryptic Studios, and New World Interactive, and that's all that we know of. So they're like, basically, it seems like they kind of had like their eggs in a basket in terms of we need to get this funding deal from Savvy Gaming Group and we'll all be good. But then that didn't happen. They're like, well, shit. That's one way to look at it anyway. So yeah, they're basically resizing, restructuring, cutting a lot of people. And according to this podcast that I mentioned earlier, some people kind of came to the conclusion, oh, they are selling Piranha Bytes because ELX 2 was sort of disappointing. That's not necessarily the case. Apparently, it's more like an immediacy thing. It's like, we need games to be released now. And Piranha Bytes is not really they just released this game like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and they're not ready to release another game for a while, and we can't afford that. We need games to release now. So that seems to be more primary to why they're closing certain studios, is studios that aren't releasing a game in the near future. So
yeah. I mean, that definitely lines up because like it's not like, let's say for example they closed down Free Radical because like, oh, the recent Time Splitters did badly. It's like they just don't have a Time Splitters like ready to go like in the next year or so.
Yep.
It was still pretty much in early production. And you know that the Free Radical and like a lot of these developers, like it's really, really sucks to see them go because they've had like very, very storied histories, whether you agree or not of like the quality of their output. And recently it's undeniable that like they've existed in the industry for a very long time and have a proven record.
Mhm.
I don't
So
it
sucks. It sucks.
I don't know the best way of putting this, but it is genuinely depressing that the people that were making all of those decisions at Embracer that have ultimately led to this, that were literally gambling on money that they never had in the first place, and have already upended thousands of people's lives, are never going to get properly punished for the damage they've done to the industry as a whole. It is genuinely depressing.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good succinct way of putting it. It's it's just like a whole almost like generation of developers gone in the blink of an eye.
Be
It doesn't feel
completely
good.
real for a second here, seeing all of these layoffs in the industry over the last obviously last year and continuing into this year, and then seeing companies dip their toes into AI, and then it's just jobs are being lost. And if AI keeps ramping up, those jobs aren't going to be replaced. And think of how many tens of thousands of people might just be shut out of the industry that they love, that they spent their lives getting into. It's just so depressing, doesn't even begin to describe how I feel watching this unfold.
I should probably also mention here, I was provided translations of the podcast episode from a acquaintance of the site. I don't know if they want to be named or not, so I'm not going to. But we basically had a German speaker who's, I'm not sure if they're a Piranha Bytes fan, but they're familiar with their output, basically briefed a couple of people hey, here's what's going on, and here's what these guys from these German outlets have said. So thank you, friend.
Massive thank you. Yes. That was a really great reporting from you and said person there on surfacing this, and also a really good job. Kind of giving a short summary of the Embracer Group saga. Obviously, that's not I felt the entire state of the industry, but it's a small insight of hey, for people who haven't been following this is what's been going on and all that. It's tough to see. But it's also doubly tough to just keep up with it because it's been happening so regularly that at some point you might just you might kind of just blanks out because it's it's just so much and then it's such a small time frame.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's so common and regular that you almost start going blind to it. It
Yeah,
just becomes noise. But then, like James said, we're less than a month into the year, and it's something like the total count is 3,000 industry jobs no longer exist. A good chunk of those are Unity, but still.
Well, this
yeah,
is not related to Embracer at all, but literally just last week, CI Games, or City Interactive, as they were formerly known, shut off or laid off 10% of their workforce. And CI Games is the publisher and studios behind the Sniper Ghost series, as well as the recently released and apparently pretty successful Lord of the Fallen. And
You
now
would
10%
think
of
that
those
they don't have
people,
to.
including at the studios, they don't have jobs anymore.
Yeah, you would think that from that success of that game, it's you would think they would be hiring more people. Here we are.
I believe Kotaku is going to try and keep track of all the industry layoffs of this year. So definitely, if you're interested in learning more, uh, I believe Kotaku is going to do that this year. So
Yeah, they have a running list.
Yeah.
Like them or not like them, they've got a list of anything that they
Mhm.
can find a primary source for
Right.
regarding layoffs.
So it's
And hopefully
also
more optimistic news. I don't know if this next story is really optimistic or not, but we'll go on to this. So Adam, I hope you're in business mode because this kind of keeps going with that. So every quarter, Square Enix has a financial results presentation, and usually it's a little bit of a delay in terms of when it gets formally translated into English. Like it'll come out in Japan, hobbyists will sort of report bits and pieces of it with or without context, and then usually after all of that, we get the actual official release on the Western branch. And you did this just recently for Square Enix's most recent financial results posting for quarter two of this fiscal year, which ended last November, because I guess their fiscal year started in midsummer.
No, their fiscal year starts in April, but this is this. So
Okay.
here's how the delay on these things work. So Square Enix's quarter two is going to be what, July, August, September. So that's quarter two. So everything about this financial results presentation is technically valid up through the end of September, and then the actual results come out in early November. That's pretty normal. That a month after the quarter, they're basically, while they're in quarter three, which is October, November, December, they basically say, okay, here's how the last quarter went. But it's even more delayed because they give this presentation in November and this Q&A in November, but it takes them 6 to 8 weeks to get that translated. So we just got the translation. So in early January, we're technically talking about results that ended in last September. That's the delay on this. But anyways, so president of Square Enix, Takashi Kiryu, presents the results. And we already saw the results. The results have already been given in November, and the results themselves basically said, Final Fantasy 16 did fine. Their MMO segment is down because they didn't have a big expansion and whatnot. It wasn't too surprising, but the Q&A is all brand new. So this is where the news comes from. It's basically, we've translated the Q&A to President Takashi Kiryu, and here's what he said. And he said a lot. Some Q&As are 2 questions long, but this one had several questions. So on our website, first of all, if you're like me and you just want to read the Q&A as is, straight up, no chaser, I included it. It's just there. You can look at it. But if you wanted a summary of it, here's basically what he said. 1, their income targets for this full year more or less hinge on the performance of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which comes out in February. Obviously, that's a huge game for them this year. It's that and Final Fantasy 16 were their big games this year. So that's what it hinges on, but they say that the initial response seems strong. Now, we don't know exactly how many sales does that mean. We don't know. You can maybe do some napkin math and maybe estimate, but anyways, they expect the MMO sub-segment to improve as we get closer and closer to Dawntrail and people get excited for it. Now, they said, this is kind of the first key thing. I saw some people saying that, Square Enix says that Final Fantasy 16 met expectations. And that's halfway true. What they actually said was the income for the first half of the year met expectations, which included Final Fantasy 16. Nitpicking maybe, but basically, it seems like Final Fantasy 16 more or less is roughly where they want it to be. But they did say that over the next 18 months, they're going to be rolling out DLC and a PC port. So that maybe gives you some indication of a time scale of when is that second DLC going to come out? When is that PC port going to come out? Maybe by the end of this year? Who knows? But they say within 18 months. Or they say within an 18-month period. Anyways, here's another key thing that Kiryu said. He said that Square Enix needs better diversity in our title portfolio. And there's a lot of different ways you can look at this. He says while Square Enix has big brands like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, those are the brands he named up front, he says games like Power Wash Simulator also are doing really well, and they're getting income from that. And he's basically, I'm not reading him verbatim here, but what he basically says is that these games that are not JRPGs, that are reaching a different audience, that they need more of those, which I think generally is a decent idea. If you look at other publishers, they might have different games in different genres that they're basically reaching a broader audience. People who like RPGs or people who like action games or whatever. Square Enix has a lot of RPGs, and I think he's basically saying, what if we tried other things in addition to that? Now, I know a lot of people like Square Enix for their RPGs, so might be not too pleased at the fact that they might try other things. But I think that's where games like Power Wash Simulator or maybe Foam Stars or these games sort of come into the picture.
Does just cause count, or that's not a Square Enix title?
Just
Eidos.
Cause.
That
I
was an
think.
Eidos
I
game.
think they still own Just Cause. I think they still own that.
Oh,
I might
okay.
be.
Oh yeah.
I might
oh,
be
yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
Because
You might have the IP, that's right.
they divested a lot of their frames. And Life is Strange. You know, that was a game that came out from Square Enix last
Yeah.
year.
I
Or
will say
Paranormal
that,
Sight.
like,
You know, these
Yep.
non-RPGs.
yeah, I'm sure like Square Enix would love if they could make if they could publish more titles like Power Wash Simulator, because that game, I think silently it's been one of Square's most successful games of the last like couple of years.
Right. And he actually even says like it meets a more casual audience, and not in any sort of derogatory term. It's just, you know, players. There are not every gamer or every possible customer plays RPGs. You know, there's a lot of people. I know someone who's really big into Power Wash, and he just loves that game. Just sort of as a get home from work and wind down and clean things off with a power hose. Anyway,
They're just like, it's time to clean Midgar. You know?
or Lara Croft Mansion or Lara Croft
Mhm.
Mansion. Anyways, but kind of in addition to that, he also says that I'll read this verbatim. I want to structure our development function so that we are able to ensure higher quality from each title by slimming down our lineup. So that caused some red flags, enough that even our boss, Alex Donaldson, wrote basically his opinion on this. And what he basically pointed to was the 2022 second half of the year. If you don't remember, in that half of the year, Square Enix released like a Voice of Cards game, Diofield Chronicle, Star Ocean 6, Tactics Ogre Reborn, Dragon Quest Treasures, Minstrel Song, Valkyrie Elysium, and the
Harvestella.
Valkyrie Lenneth
But
port.
there's Harvestella too.
Harvestella. There was also the ports for Triangle Strategy and something else maybe in that time frame. Like all of these games released within like a 4-month period, and then Forspoken wasn't that long after that. And basically,
It was in
Alex's
January, right?
argument was this is a lot of games, and this is maybe a problem for two reasons. One, it's practically impossible to just market that many games well. You have to like you can only market it so much with so many resources that some of the games might have just slipped under the radar in terms of, you know, trying to get the word out there like, hey, here's this game that we're promoting. And two,
And then to give it, hold on, before that, to
Sure.
give an example of this, like, remember, like, especially Harvester and Tactics Ogre Reborn, like, the most marketing they ever did for that was, like, blog updates.
yes,
That's primarily how they did it. And it's like, okay. Well,
I feel like the only marketing I ever seen for Tactics Ogre was, oh, we found this in a leak. It's like,
yeah, that's the biggest, yeah, honestly, that might have been, like, the biggest word of mouth of it.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's like, obviously there was a bunch of those Square Enix games like in late 2022 that released at the same time. Like even like using Harvestella as like an example, I feel like that was one of the few that maybe got back their investment.
Hey,
It's really
sorry.
hard to
Adam. Yeah.
the second thing I was going to say was just like audience overlap. A lot of these games appeal to like the same sorts of people like us, and Alex even said basically our reader base. And just, you know, how many of you have played all of those games that released? I haven't gotten around to Harvestella yet because I was busy with
I only
Valkyrie
played,
Elysium
like,
and
2
other
hours.
things. Yeah, so that's kind of the other point that Alex made and others is just that like these games just there's a little bit too much overlap between all of these, all releasing so close. And so from that standpoint, like maybe slimming down the lineup isn't necessarily a bad idea. But Alex basically in his editorial, and I agree with him, basically he's like, be careful. Because some of these games are where like the more interesting kind of creativity and thoughts and structures and ideas might come from. He pointed to like the obvious example of Nier Automata. Like, what are the chances that, you know, he said like a game that was basically a 6 out of 10 Nier, you know, gets a sequel, you know, that in like this sort of mindset, if they're trying to slim down a lineup, like chances like that are maybe less likely to get made. And then he basically said some of those games that released last year, people liked, you know, parts of Star Ocean or Harvestella or the Tactics Ogre Reborn. I liked components of Diofield, despite being a bit uneven. Like, there are things about these games that people like, and they're not bad games. or at least there's going to be some of those that you might be fond of. So he's basically cautioning Square Enix, like, okay, slimming down the lineup. Maybe don't release 16 games in 16 weeks or whatever it was.
Yeah. I feel like there's like
But-
more of like a scheduling problem more
Right.
so than like a quality problem, right? Because it's just like on paper, it's just like, why don't we just like, have things released throughout the year, spread it, instead of like, this is our fucking fiscal year target window
Yeah.
to like both our numbers. It's like,
It's a terrible idea. It's
That's
like
the
going to the
first
buffet,
thing.
you know? There's like a
That's
ton of
the
food.
paper.
It's like, but your stomach can only feel so much, you know?
Yeah. Like I really like this like weird experimental phase that Square Enix was in, in that time period, because like a lot of the like you said, Adam, like a lot of those cuts are interesting. It's not like that, like, oh, they should like cut this. I would even champion, like, even though like I wasn't the biggest fan of Forspoken, I wouldn't be opposed to like, like snipping that from existence,
Right.
It's just one of those things. It's like I think they just need to really think about like their scheduling of things.
So I'm just thinking ahead. Oh, first of all, let me just take a small aside because one of the later questions on this Q&A was sort of amusing. He was asked about Infinity Strash Dragon Quest. And basically, like, what happened
Of all
here?
things.
Yeah. And
The question is like, why was it garbage?
he basically asked, or he basically answered one, and we had actually said this. He basically said there was too much time that elapsed between the anime ending and the game, so it just like it kind of lost that current like that relevancy, I guess. So that was one thing, and we had said that. And two, he said there was like too much of a disconnect between what the game actually was and what people wanted the game to be. We had talked about how like the games for weird reasons is like mostly this like roguelike mode with like this tacked on like the cutscene stuff that we talked about, or like retelling of the story. It wasn't really like anyways, we've talked about that. Then he basically said that was probably an issue. Anyways, enough of that tangent. I was trying to think ahead to like Square Enix this year. Let's just talk. I know it's always fun to look ahead.
This calendar year,
yes.
even though that's not how they
yeah, so
year.
fiscal year ends in March. So we know, obviously, Final Fantasy VII Remake Rebirth is the big kind of closer to this fiscal year. And that's basically going to make or break your fiscal year. Next year...
When does their fiscal year end? Is it end of March?
31st.
Okay.
So I don't think they have anything after that. No. Right. Okay, so like... the next fiscal year, so this is fiscal year 20 that ends in 2025. They have what? There's Saga, I think, is the first game. Saga Emerald Beyond, and then we know there's a Visions of Mana title in summer. This is technically a different sub segment because they have their HD games in their MMO sub segment. There's Dawn Trail coming out. Is there anything else that we know of? I know there's stuff that is rumored.
I'm blanking. I don't think so.
There must be like a Dragon Quest X expansion.
Oh yeah, there's Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D. Will that show up?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Foam Stars, is that?
Oh yeah, there's Foam Stars. I forgot about
Yeah.
Foam Stars is this fiscal year actually, so it's February. And
It's
March.
Yeah,
January.
Foam Stars is really weird because even separated from all the like controversy stuff that's been happening this week because of the AI thing, technically that game is releasing a month early for PlayStation Plus subscribers, and then the full game if you don't want to. Yeah, it's why.
I don't know.
Just
I don't know. I'm trying to think what else. I think that's pretty much it. So it's Foam Stars, then FF7 Rebirth, then then moving on to the next fiscal year, you have Saga in April, Visions of Mana sometime in summer, and then Dawn Trail.
Well,
and
that just means in the second half of 2024 we're getting Kingdom Hearts 4 and Dragon Quest 12.
I mean, it's also very, very. We're also expecting probably a PC port of Dragon Quest Monsters.
Probably.
And probably a PC port of Rebirth. I don't know if it's this year or next year, but like the exclusivity window on Rebirth is like up until May, I believe, according to the latest video.
Yeah, it's like 3
Like the-
months technically.
Yeah.
But anyway, Square Enix sometimes will announce and release games relatively quickly. Like last year, I believe, like Star Ocean remake was announced in like May or something and released 6 months later. So that can happen. So
right. And then there's
Or they
stuff
do
like
the thing with
factoring.
Dragon Quest Treasures was like shadow dropped on
the
PC.
PC port. They'll do that with Dragon Quest Monsters at some point. Like, it's on Steam now.
So
But I
they
was actually looking at
definitely
I was looking at the games that Square Enix released last year too. It was a much thinner year in 2023, just with like bigger titles. So last year they had Final Fantasy 16. That was their first major release of the fiscal year. So obviously that's a huge game. And then they had Infinity Strash. They had Little Goody Two Shoes. They had Star Ocean, and then Dragon Quest, and now Final Fantasy VII.
Do they put Ever Crisis in this as well?
I didn't have Ever Crisis on my list.
Yeah.
But that also released. So basically, even if I'm missing a game there, wasn't as jam packed as 2022. There were still a handful of those smaller titles like Star Ocean and Dragon Quest Monsters, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, this current fiscal year that we're in, it's basically the big hitters are Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So next year, sort of, we have the ones that we mentioned. It's kind of curious what we'll see. So
Saga and Mana have to carry. That's what I'm hearing.
I do think it is just kind of nuts to think about it for long-term fans like us, like a Saga game and a Mana game in 2024. Today's climate. Wow, what?
We've never been so back.
Well, thank you, Adam, for driving us through a kind of a business-related segment of the news part of the podcast. We'll wrap up the podcast. We got a number of headlines here, but a lot of these are just kind of release dates or new updates. To go through the end of the year, or the end of the cast, I mean. We got 2 trailers for some upcoming RPGs out of the Xbox Developer Direct 2024. I think one of these we expected, and one of these, at least when I saw the headline and I watched it, was a surprise. I'll start with that one because we're talking about Square Enix. They showcased a lot of footage about the upcoming Visions of Mana at the Xbox Developer Direct, because this is one of the Square Enix games. You know, they're splatter on a wall of where they're releasing games and their exclusivity contracts. Visions of Mana is coming out on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation, not on Switch. So when I watched this trailer, to me, I kind of felt like I really wish I had played Trials of Mana, because I feel like that's where I would draw a lot of analogs to. Those that have played Trials of Mana, when you saw this, are you like more excited, less excited, or is this kind of what you expected to see?
We said this last week or the week before. It looks like Trials of Mana, but with more budget. It seems similar.
But it's definitely like there's definitely more movement options. Like you see like a dash and an air dash, and like combat just seems more fluid in general with this early footage of Visions of Mana. So I mean that to me, I'm excited. This looks really great. It seems to be like a combo oriented game, but has like you can mix in like elemental magic spells and like your attack pattern, and like that's a really interesting like direction for them to take it in. They also showed off like briefly like another playable character.
There's actually 2 I saw. One of them one of them you see like just a hair of, and by hair I mean like literally hair, in like one of the boss battle scenes. It's like someone with like a really big like red poofy mane, but the character that they showed a little bit, not really, they didn't really highlight this. There's like I can't even tell if it's like a man or a woman, but it's a yellow haired like fencer with like cat ears.
Mm-hmm. The highlight of this video though was Koichi Ishii and his fit.
Yep.
Like Ishii looked really good. He has like this leather jacket. And it's all strapped up. And he's talking about like, yeah, man, I made these like the cutest lovable creatures.
Yeah, he's got his hair like slicked back, high and tight.
Yeah,
it looks like he belongs in like a dragon game.
So if you're not familiar, he's the creator of the Mana series, but he doesn't work at Square Enix anymore. Is he the founder of Grezzo, or did he just join Grezzo?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. That's a good question. I didn't think about that.
Oh, he was hired as the CEO of Grezzo. I don't know if he found it, but he's basically the boss of it. And Grezzo, if you're not familiar, they do a bunch of stuff or they had for Nintendo. Like they did some of those like Zelda 3DS ports. They worked on like the Luigi's Mansion, Link Awakening like remake. They did the Miitopia remake a few years ago. They're currently working on something called Jet Dragon, which is an iOS game. But anyways, he returned basically to show off a new creature companion known as a pickle, not pickle, a pickle, which is what he said is like the mix between a Yorkshire Terrier and a pangolin, which is sort of like an armadillo type of thing. So it's like an armored or a giant armored doggo, is what it is. It's
And
very
you can
adorable.
write it, and it looks very fluffy, and I'm really jealous. I want one. But yeah, it's looking great. They announced a summer time frame for the release of this game, not necessarily a release date yet. They said that the soundtrack will have a list of over 100 songs,
Yep.
and it'll have Kikuta, Sekiro, Yamazaki. And I think that's also one of the standout things about like this Xbox Direct developer direct segment they did is like the music is already shaping up to be really, really good.
I really just like this style where they showed a bunch of like the first of all, I'm not entirely sure who is developing this. With Square Enix, it's almost a safe bet to say like if it's not like Final Fantasy Mainline or Kingdom Hearts or whatever that they're contracting someone else to do it. Like for example, the Last Trials game was made by Zine, but they showed the studio, which maybe it's internal, maybe it's not. I don't know. That's like making this game, and they were showing like some of like the artists creating some of the creatures and some of the elementals that are very familiar to the series. There was just kind of a nice behind the scenes look of everything. And I just thought that was kind of a neat segment. They were kind of showing like Hoichi Ichi and kind of like some of the monster animations, which are really adorable. So I just like the style of it.
If you're reading between the lines of like, oh, why does Microsoft have like a third party Japanese developer in their developer direct for this? It's like it's definitely one of those like, hey, we're partnered with Square Enix too. Like before the launch of the PlayStation 5 exclusive FF7 Rebirth, it's kind of like getting their foot in the door, saying, hey, we're partnering with Square Enix too for a game. Not necessarily that this game's gonna be exclusive to Xbox systems, but they like just want to give a nod to the audience, like hey, we have a relationship with Square Enix as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of been their posture for the last couple of years.
Yeah, there's like in full force right
as
now
we've
with
talked
Sega.
about, like with Sega. Yeah.
Yeah.
I should know this, but I don't remember. Was Final Fantasy 14 finally confirmed for Xbox?
I
So
think they
this is
have a beta.
they did. I mean, FF14 is they announced it's coming to Xbox.
Okay, yeah.
There's a mistweet earlier this week saying that open beta went live for Xbox, and then they've rectified it to Xbox, saying, oh, that was like misfire on our end. We'll let you know when it's actually going to be up. So apparently there was some misinformation going around because they initially said that they were in open beta right now.
Mm. The other game that we got a kind of a similar kind of developer look in at the Xbox Developer Direct is one of their first party games. This is for Avowed. This is the first person fantasy RPG being developed by Obsidian. So this one was basically, instead of Koichi Ishii, it was Kerry Patel over at Obsidian. And this is a game that, one thing I didn't say is Visions of Mana is coming out this summer.
Yep.
Avowed is coming out before the end of the year. Yeah, the fall. So the Avowed showcase was a little bit shorter, and it showed a little bit of combat gameplay. A good section of it was just a dialogue, which is not, which is fine. That's what you expect to be doing a lot of in an RPG. But I thought it was maybe not the best showcase for
Hard
the
to
game.
vertical slice that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was just about to say these sorts of
Obsidian.
games are very hard to like get a
Yeah.
read on in a quick couple minute video.
I don't necessarily blame Obsidian for that. It's just very hard to like kind of sell your characters and morally gray decisions like in a very, very quick segment. I think the highlight of Avowed is like kind of how they're doing their dual wield weapon system, where you can kind of mix and match anything like dual wands, a wand and a gun, a wand and a sword, a gun and a sword, dual swords, dual guns. So you can kind of mix and match however you want to in combat, and I hope that has a pretty meaningful gameplay implication instead of like just being swappable at a whim and like being effectively a weapon, like a skin. So I have high hopes that like this will be a robust dual wield combat system. Like ideally, what I want is a wand that can like do elemental damage, like say freeze, and then get like a blunderbuss and like fucking explode that frozen enemy to pieces. The dual wield, so something like that.
I remember when Avowed first, not when it was first shown, but when it was shown last year, when it was re-revealed over the summer, there was a little bit of like middling or even negative response to the art style being a little bit more cartoony, and this does show that it does kind of have a little bit of that cartoony-ish art style. I can't think of a better word. There's a better word than
Slightly
cartoony, but it's a little bit
stylized,
more
not
stylized, comic bookish in a way. It's not trying to be Obsidian or Microsoft's Skyrim. I guess I'll put it that way in terms of how it looks. Though they do have a section at the end of this little showcase where they primarily focus on the environments, and I think the environments actually look really nice.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
they're
there's
really
one
bright.
small thing I actually appreciated. They also had the combat director and like art director talking a bit about this game. And one thing I actually really appreciated was the art director made like a quick comment on like some of the locations are really colorful and verdant, and some of the locations are more dull. And they showed like a desert, and I actually like appreciate that. Like there is a desert in the game, and it's going to be more dull than like the forest or whatever. And it's like I think that variety is good. Like I don't think every location in the game has to be like, you know, neon lights like flashing at you. Look at me, you know. I think the variety is good. Having like a duller desert contrasting to the more colorful forest. So
You want a neon desert. Get it.
But yeah, I'm excited for this. The showcase probably wasn't as interesting as the Visions of Mana one, but it's something I'm still excited for. And I remember one thing I actually called out as soon as I watched this is that I'm pretty sure their dialogue font is this. It's like the same like serif font that they used for the Pillars games. And I know this game is like, it's not really a Pillars game. They're using like the same mythos because they kind of already established that. But I do kind of want to like, if I had infinite time, I definitely would replay them. I probably will not because I do not have that time.
I need to play them for the first time, and you can like watch.
Okay, so that's just going to be your role this year is that you play these games, and then I'll watch you play them to remember what happens in them.
But they did say in a previous thing, like at Summer Games Fest, that there will be some characters from. They specifically said 2 that show up. So
it's almost certainly going to be Adair or Aloth.
Are they like immortal or something?
They're just well, actually, I don't know when this takes place in terms of like time, like before or after. I'm sure they've said it, but I've just completely flushed it out of my brain. Whether this is like concurrent with the other games or shortly before, shortly after. But those two are those are gate characters that were in both 1 and 2, party members in both 1 and 2, kind of more than popular characters, etc.
Ryan, I have a question for you as you know, as someone who has played, well, not me, but you who has played Pillars. Is there like any like environment in either Pillars 1 or 2 that like you would like to see in first person instead of isometric?
I forget the name of the city, but the capital city in Pillars 2, because it's like a Hawaiian Polynesian imperial island.
Oh, okay, that sounds cool.
What's the name of the Pillars of Eternity 2 capital? Let's see. Nekataka. So that would be cool to see in first person.
Okay.
But I don't know if this takes place, because Pillars of Eternity 2 takes place like on like Pillars of Eternity 1 set up like a lot of the continent and the regions, and then Pillars of Eternity 2 is like, okay, now we're going to this game takes place on the Deadfire archipelago, whatever. So it's a little bit more like focused in that way. So it's not like a world spanning thing. It's a very local conflict.
It's actually really interesting.
It gets a little bit. Yeah, but so I don't know if the Deadfire Isles will make an appearance in this game, but that would be cool. It'd be a nod for the 100,000 of us that played Pillars of Eternity 2.
Apparently, Pillars of Eternity 2 has over time become pretty successful. I know at like launch they were talking about like this game was disappointing in terms of like its sales potential, but I guess it's over time done decently well.
Yeah, Josh Sawyer is pretty open about it. Where it is a little bit where they don't really know what went wrong. They're like, yeah, we released a game, it was critically successful and financially not really successful. Like when you have something like that, you're like, well, what did we do wrong? We had a
It's
game.
also, yeah, it's also one of those things too, because you know, because it's proven that like a CRPG can be mega successful too.
Yeah, this year especially. Yeah.
So just like fuck.
The rest of the news posts that we have on this podcast, I think I have them largely kind of chronological, so I'll kind of go through them. First off, we kind of talked about this game in passing in one of the last topics, but Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince, released in December as a Switch exclusive, it did reach the 1 million sales mark, and that sales includes like ship to stores and digital downloads, so 1 million total sales uh, within a month of release for a Dragon Quest Monsters spinoff. So I think that seems pretty successful. And I remember when I was writing this news post very quickly to help Adam, uh, Dragon Quest Treasures, which is like the contemporary from the year prior, never got an update saying that it ever hit the million mark, even with its PC release. So
This is
for
highly
better,
impressive. I'm interested. Did they ever give like a regional breakdown, or maybe they were
Yeah, I was
Oh,
curious.
it's gotta be like at least like 90% in Japan or something like that.
I can't find a copy of this game, to be honest with you. So you tell me where the hell these sales come from in the
Nintendo
North
eShop.
American side.
I know from just the physical copies sold in Japan alone, it was like I want to say it was like the last I saw was like around 550,000.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
let me check install base really quick because there's
Because I know Dragon Quest Monsters is very, very popular in Japan, and like doubly so because it's like linked to Dragon Quest 4. They're like,
Yeah.
fuck yeah.
I think there's going to be
Fuck
clearly it seems more successful than Treasures and probably a better game than Treasures. And we talked about I think Treasures has got some interesting ideas, but I think the fact that it is tied to Final Fantasy IV, there might be a lot of
Dragon Quest 4.
Sorry, Dragon Quest 4. A lot of fans, of that game, older, even younger, whatever, just pick it up because of that.
Yeah, so as of last week, it seems like the game has sold like 529,000 copies physically in Japan as of last week. Not counting digital, not counting this week. I'm expecting the vast majority of sales to have been in Japan, which isn't surprising.
Man, our fellow Japanese gamers, they see Sara on the cover and they're like, yeah, instant buy.
Water is wet, the sky is blue. A Dragon Quest game sold well in Japan.
Yes.
I would have guessed.
do you think Dragon Quest Treasures would have done better if it was just still a Monsters game? Because it was announced as a Monsters game.
Was it?
They should have had like a Dragon Quest 3 person on the cover. Even though if they never show up in the game, they would have. You know how many more copies that game would have sold? They had a Dragon Quest 3 character on the cover. Holy shit!
Here are a couple games that are now available. One game and one demo. So came out this week. We haven't had anyone on the site play this yet, but Sovereign Syndicate is an indie CRPG that released just in the last week. You might have heard this game before. This is an indie take on basically what has been described as a steampunk Disco Elysium. And I read a few Steam reviews in preparation for this podcast, and it seems like a lot of people are pretty high on it. I've heard some people say that the Disco Elysium comparison isn't quite valid, but I've seen a lot more reviews invoke the comparison. So it seems like it has some merit. Otherwise, the majority
At a glance,
of reviews don't all go to that.
like the dialogue tree system and having like your internal, thoughts talk to you, it looks
Yeah.
on the surface like, oh, that's just Disco Elysium.
Even the demo that I played of it, I was like, this is very Disco Elysium. So I mean, maybe it changes up like in the full game, but just first impressions.
But I read the RPG fan review of this game because we didn't have anyone check it out, and he said that actually like the writing is pretty strong. I would be shocked if it was as strong as Disco Elysium because that game has like absolutely stellar writing, but apparently it's not bad. Some more issues maybe with actual like gameplay mechanics, but that wasn't really Disco Elysium's strength either.
Yeah, I mean, like you're here for like a lot of reading and text. So
Yeah, there's this one Steam review that says they are all comparing it to Disco Elysium when it isn't very much like that. It's more appropriately compared to a series called Pendula Swing, which I
Never
don't
heard
know
of
what
it.
that is, but it's another series of games on Steam.
Well, it's basically like, when you're comparing Unicorn Overlord to Fire Emblem, it's really Ogre Battle, but since only 3 people have played Ogre Battle, yeah, one thing is Fire
There you
Emblem.
go.
Got it.
I saw
It
someone
all
compare
full
Unicorn
circle.
to Suikoden, and I don't get it.
I don't know how you get that.
That one's crazy. That
Good for
one's
them.
That's crazy because we literally have like
We have the Suikoden comparison.
we have Hayden coming out in April. It's like
They're gonna
God.
compare that game to something else.
Dude, they're gonna compare it to Beyblade because they only saw that one just screenshot of the Beyblade minigame. It's like it's just like Beyblade. Entire.
Also available now, a demo is now on PC, PlayStation, and Switch for Fate Samurai Remnant, a game that did pretty damn well in our Game of the Year awards.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and,
there's a
There's a
demo
DLC
available.
coming out next month, although we don't really know a whole lot about it. They've
Yep.
like announced it and showed it, but it's still like, what is it? It has
I
something
mean,
to do
usually
with
don't they
the
release
boss.
I mean, usually don't they release a demo before the game comes out to get people hyped for the game?
Sometimes you see this sometimes where they release a demo after the fact.
yeah, it happens not that often, but it happens.
Speaking of DLCs, Sword Art Online Last Recollection is getting its first DLC. At least I assume it's its first DLC. Ritual Bonds Volume 1 is releasing on January 25th, so just within a week of recording.
My takeaway from this game from people I know who have played it and liked Licorice Alicization, or was it the other way around? Was this game is way worse than the previous one.
Oh wow!
And they all pretty much bounced off of it. They're like, well, we were excited to get into this game, and it's like pretty significantly worse. So never mind.
This game seems to be the sort of thing that Sword Art Online fans actually care about, where it's like you get to choose your wife.
So even then, like even for that crowd, apparently, even that crowd is like the game is so uninteresting to play compared to the last one. That's not even enough for them to really latch onto it. So
I like how a kite put in there. You can also choose Yu-Gi-Oh to be your wife. Thing
Hell
is
yeah.
Yu-Gi-Oh is like the one male character.
It's
So,
the blonde dude. I was
Yeah.
playing Trees of him.
Is the childhood friend inside the new VR MMO?
yes. People have made that joke, I think, enough, where like he's like the one male character, but he can also be the wife. Like ever since that story came out. So yeah.
Okay.
All right, Chow, it's that time of the month again. It's the
What was
Genshin Impact
disaster?
update.
Okay, so I heard that Genshin Impact finally added gaming.
It's
Ooh.
jamming. It's jamming. Okay,
Oh.
that's how
What
you
they-
pronounce it as a real Chinese person. It's jamming.
Oh, I was gonna guess
Okay,
it's
wait,
like-
wait. How do you spell this? Hold on,
It's
I'm lost.
spelled
It's spelled
like the
exactly
word
as gaming in
gaming.
English.
Oh, okay.
It's like when you try to search up an article, it's like Genshin has added gaming.
Oh, I see. It's like they have a character 4-star Pyro Claymore user. It's spelled gaming, but child here says jamming.
I was gonna guess like
And it's a
Jamin,
name.
but I guess it's Ja. Okay.
Okay. All right. Tell us about gaming.
I had known nothing about this guy. I'm just coming back here to buy Ganyu and Shanhei costumes.
And then you're gonna dip out. Like I'm gonna buy the costumes, and then I'm going back to Honkai.
It's like
All right, the
Ganyu-
highlights. Based on the news post on our site at rpgsite.net, which you should bookmark and visit regularly. The update includes a Liu expansion to the northwest to Shenyu Vale. The Lantern Rite Festival will return with a free outfit for Shinku.
Xingqiu.
There's two new playable characters, Zhan Yun and Gaming.
Gaming.
Jaming.
But yeah, I might
And a
come
new
back to
Ganyu
roll.
outfit.
I might come back to roll for Xingyan. I think she's supposed to be the cloud retainer.
Are you gonna play the game or just roll?
Just roll. That's what you play gacha games for. The
No hesitation.
gambling high.
Oh, they have new technology apparently. This news post. I saw. Oh, you added gifs. Holy shit, Adam!
Yes.
How did you do it? That's crazy.
Magic.
Oh my god. So yeah, they have new technology, I guess. Fog.
Powered by AI.
All right.
Yeah,
I
that'll
mean,
come
that's
out on January 31st. 4.4 called Vibrant Harriers Aloft in Spring Breeze. And there's a trailer showing all this stuff too. And then I closed my podcast doc to
Mhm.
to go to the news post, and then I pull it back up and scroll back down. All right, here we go. During the upcoming Steam Next Fest next month, I guess that is coming in February, there'll be a playable demo of an indie RPG called Sword of Convallaria. And I saw that you were kind of posting some updates to this game in the staff Discord last night, Josh. The developer kind of announced some interesting new tidbits for this upcoming game that we weren't
Yes.
expecting.
Yeah, so this is a game that was first I believe it's out in Taiwan, but like its global version was announced last year. It was supposed to come out later last year, but then they delayed it back to 2024. There's a free to play pixel art strategy RPG. So this would be the comparisons of like, oh, there's like Fire Emblem. It's like, yeah, it's kind of like Fire Emblem. Um,
Why do I
and
feel like the rest of the thing is whenever there's a game that is remotely like strategic, you're like, Brian, this is like Fire Emblem.
and so I guess the headliner here is there's a Steam Fest Next Fest demo that'll contain, they say it'll contain up to 10 hours of single player content for people. So that's already a meaty demo. The interesting thing about this game is like there's two modes to it: Elysium and Spiral of Destinies. Elysium is like your typical free to play gacha game structure of like you have stamina, you roll for characters, stages consume stamina, so forth. And they describe this as a dynamic online mode. They're planning for guilds and like friendly PvP and so forth. And then the other mode that this game will have in its full release is called Spiral of Destinies, and they describe this as a standalone single player RPG, and they say it'll have multiple endings, roguelike elements, and then verbatim from the video, they said it'll be completely separate from any monetization in the game. So this will just be a standard RPG that's free to play that has like no monetization attached
But didn't
to
they
it.
also say that like they're gonna be expanding the single player mode?
So yeah, so that's the
With
thing. Yeah. So they're gonna use revenue that gained from the monetization of that Elysium mode, that other mode, the actual live game service mode, to feed into the content development of this single player mode. So I guess there's gonna be like new stories of like new of like continuing characters or whatever. I don't know exactly how they're gonna expand the story, but apparently they're gonna continually like build out this single player mode from the revenue gained from that other mode that they monetize. It's it sounds okay on paper. I don't know exactly how it's gonna pan out. I guess it really depends on like how to incentivize people to like spend money on the live service mode, I guess. So that was an interesting tidbit that they shared in like this developer update of the video. I don't know too many people who obviously played like the full game that's already out in Taiwan. So I don't know exactly how that's how that's actually shaking out over there. Um, they announced that like this will initially be launching for Steam, iOS, and Android. And then they have a Nintendo Switch version as development. So there's a weird thing because when this game was initially announced last year, they already said that a PlayStation and Switch version was like coming, but now they're just like focusing on the Nintendo Switch version, and then eventually they want to release it to other platforms in the future. Um, so I kind of been keeping an eye on this game. They kind of shared some feedback on like some of the features that they're going to be improving from like the closed beta test that they did. They got a lot of feedback. They're like, okay, a lot of people don't like the way that this game like handles on the UI front, like because I guess moving around people was like sort of a chore, so they have like a specialized UI now to make that easier. Um, and they also, I guess they got a lot of feedback of like, hey, like it's this game seems cool, but I don't really like free to play gacha game models. So, you know, I'm way more interested in it now because it'll have a mode that's like separate from the monetization. I'm hoping it doesn't feel like it's GIMP because of that. We'll see. But I'm more interested in this game now because it'll have that other mode that's just a single player RPG normal, apparently. So I'll definitely check out the demo. That Steam Next Test demo. Apparently, it's a meaty one. Hopefully, it's good.
Yeah, you always do a really good job at touching on a bunch of games at those Steam festivals. I do appreciate it. The next news post is a game that is coming out in February out of early access that is action RPG. It's a Diablo-like as far as I can see. Last Epoch. This is a game that's been on Steam in early access since 2019 and has already like sold over 1 million copies to what seems to be really favorable reviews. And it's having its 1.0 official launch on February 21st. Alongside this, they got a new trailer and some details, as well as like some kind of line by line details of like the different editions of the game, what players who already own it can do to like get freebies or upgrade their purchase, things like that. So the trailer and the gameplay of this game looks really fluid and fun, like a dark fantasy RPG.
I hear a lot of good things from
If
people like from my friends who are like really really big into Path of Exile. They're like, yeah, there's a pretty solid action RPG. So
yeah, if it
actually want
wasn't
to check it
releasing
out.
in like in February,
Exactly. I will eventually get
This-
around to it when there's like time to play it.
Mhm.
I definitely want to give it a shot. It looks like a lot of fun.
Mhm. Another CRPG is coming out on March 7th. This is Zoria: Age of Shattering. Let's see. This one is not early access. It's just fully releasing on March 7th. We got a new
Kind of an
gameplay
interesting
trailer
about
for
this
that.
one is that they were planning on doing early access, and then they were like, "No, we don't need to do early access."
That's interesting. How often do you hear that? Normally it's the other
Mhm.
direction. Like we should do early access.
Yeah, this is more like an indie scale tactical computer RPG. So
I
this
do
is
like how in their press release they're like, it's still set to launch on March 7th, 2024, henceforth known as International Stop Playing Baldur's Gate 3 Day.
yeah,
They
they kind of
really
poked
were.
fun at that. We're like,
Mhm.
please try us out. So instead of Baldur's Gate.
So that one's coming out on March 7th, being
I
published by Anchar Publishing.
probably will only try this one if I hear good word of mouth. I don't after like games like Dark Envoy last year, which I didn't really care for. Like I'm gonna wait and see what the people say.
Yeah, and not going to go in sight unseen. Going to see what the word of mouth is. So Last Epoch, because it's in early access, kind of already has a lot of that kind of
Oh
baked
yeah.
in, where this one, of course, doesn't.
hmm
So interesting. And not quite. They're both isometric, but Last Epoch again is like the Diablo like, and then Zoria is more of the classic CRPG like, the Baldur's Gate 3 like.
Hmm.
In April, we get the Xbox release for Neptunia Sisters versus Sisters.
The Switch version of that comes
In
out next week. And I guess obviously the interesting thing here is, did we ever expect Neptunia to be on Xbox? Well, no, but here it is.
we also
Uh,
talked about the weird.
I expect XDP to be on all platforms after a certain point. So yeah.
I mean, there is an
it's the
Xbox
whole story
character.
with the console
So,
wars.
yeah,
Obviously,
so-
you gotta have them eventually.
But
Kind of
the thing
interesting.
is, the thing is the Xbox character is the one that doesn't have a sister. So how can that be the sisters versus sisters game? Why do I know this?
Damn, maybe you are the
Holy shit! The Tunia lore expert has logged on. Hello.
Hey, when I have to cover
But
like news for every single one of these games, you learn things through osmosis. Bert is the Xbox character and is the only one without a sister.
What's her shtick? She doesn't have a sister, but what's
know.
her shtick?
I don't
She's really into MMOs.
Okay.
She's the gamer.
Damn, where's the
What's
gotcha
it-
gamer?
what-
the
I
rest
could
of
say
them are
she's the
normies.
gaming.
So,
Who's the gotcha gamer?
Probably Vert also, to be honest.
Well, we talked about talking about the Switch release, how it's very. I won't go all the way back into the details of this, but each version has like some strange exclusives. Like the Switch version has
Yeah.
2 playable characters that the Xbox version doesn't. In the Xbox version, no matter what, you get the swimsuit DLC, and the
well,
Switch
what's more
version, you have to
important,
get
the
the
playable
digital
characters or
deluxe.
swimsuits?
The swimsuits.
Okay.
That depends on who you ask, Adam.
hmm
Adam's favorite annual post. We have a trailer and details for the upcoming Bethesda Elder Scrolls Online expansion. This year, it is called Gold Road. It'll be launching on June 18th.
June 3rd for PC, June 18th for consoles.
Oh, I see. I see that now. My
That's what
apologies.
they
June
usually
3rd
do.
PC,
I'm assuming they do that
June
just for
18th for
like.
consoles.
I'm assuming they've always done that. I'm assuming they do that for like stability reasons. Like, all right, let's get the PC base in first, make sure everything is stable, and then get the console base in later.
Yeah, it might be the certification process on the consoles. If they have to do any hot fixes or anything on the PC base, they can make sure that it gets in there for the
Right.
console release.
Um,
Speaking as someone who has never developed an MMO for a console, that's my understanding, is that doing the certification for the console process is a tricky thing to work around.
but also, I guess for Elder Scrolls fans, like this one, you're revisiting areas from Oblivion.
Mhm.
Like, there's been other ones where it's like you're going to like Morrowind areas. Last year was Necrom. I forget where Necrom took place. But yeah, this is like revisiting Oblivion areas, or at least some.
And then we don't have a date for this yet, but we are going to get a physical release of Yuan's sword, Mist Beyond the Mountains. We'll get a physical release sometime this year. It's currently available on PC and Switch.
Kind of just to tag on to that, they also Sabotage Studio also opened pre-orders for the physical release of Sea of Stars that you can get. So basically, both of these games, completely different situations, but released digitally for Switch and other platforms last year, and now kind of after the fact, you see this more and more often now, where they kind of get like a collector's physical version that you can get for those who want to collect something to hold on to.
And the last headline that we have here is kind of an interesting one. This is a game we might have actually brought up in passing in an older podcast. Like, where did that game go? Back in let's see when this was. 2019, during one of the initial China Hero Project, like Sony initiatives, a developer released a trailer and a concept for a game called AI Limit, which was very much like a Nier Automata inspired action RPG. We thought it was pretty interesting. We covered its initial announcement back in March of 2019, and then, as far as I can tell, it went pretty much dark. I'm not sure if you like.
There was a gameplay trailer after that, like June 2019.
That same year.
Yeah,
gotcha. And then I don't know if you followed like that publisher's like specific creatives, their social media or anything like that, if they got any little tidbits, or if you followed like their like hiring practices or studio, but nothing on a formal like announcement front until this week. And it's been announced that AI Limit is set to release this year in 2024 for PlayStation 5 and PC. This included both a Chinese and an English gameplay trailer for the game.
and first of all, one thing that's sort of interesting is that when the game was announced, the publisher was listed as one second, because I think the publisher changed in the meantime. The publisher was named. Shoot, I don't have it. But anyways, the publisher is now
no blame
CE
because
Asia.
it was a long time ago.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was Palm Pioneer, and now it's CE Asia. And the studio is Sense Games. But yeah, so this is like a post-apocalyptic action RPG. It does have a character that sort of looks like 2B, and when it was announced, Nier Automata was a little bit more in vogue, more recent. So it kind of has like people make that comparison. The art style now is a little bit more cel shaded. I saw someone actually compare it to like Code Vein.
Yeah, that's the first thing I thought of too. My friends.
So, now one thing that's sort of interesting is that there's an English trailer, and then there's a Mandarin trailer, and then there's a trailer with Japanese subtitles, not voices. But according to the Steam page, it'll have just Japanese and Chinese voices, not English. Now, sometimes those Steam pages are wrong, but it wouldn't be the first time you have a trailer with like English voiceover, but it's only for like marketing. But anyways, we're not certain what the voice options will be, but it's, this is sort of a debut indie-ish action RPG. Some of the combat stuff looks fluid and fun to me. Coming out this year for PS5 and Steam. So
Yeah, I
I'll
definitely
keep an
want to
eye
check
on
it
it
out. Yeah,
for
it seems
sure.
really interesting. They also mentioned in their Steam post that just verbatim from today onwards, AI limit is coming back. According to the plan, we'll reveal more details, including gameplay, settings, and artworks, future updates, and most importantly, they plan to have a demo and then a release date. So, if you're interested in trying this before buying it, I guess they are planning to release a demo for this game.
Now, Lost Soul Aside will release any day now.
And they don't have a release date for that yet, have they? Do
Well,
they? They keep
my
showing
point
it.
is that these games that were showed at like these China Hero Project or related showcases, sometimes they go dormant for a while and like you don't
Yeah,
hear from them, and they almost feel like they're vaporware. But this one finally got a update from it. Lost Soul Aside, which is another similar situation, we've gotten a
I
few updates on
mean,
that one too. But maybe that one
I
will
guess that
also get a Steam
I,
date.
I gotta have it. I gotta hand it to Sony a little on their China Hero project. They at least let the developers cook, for
Yeah.
quite a while.
Hmm.
Like, they're not like, hey, you have to meet this deadline to really push it out as fast as possible. They really seem committed on giving these teams as a decent amount of time to get their game going. That's definitely nice to see.
And that was the last headline that we had for this episode of the podcast. Of course, go
We
ahead.
have we have a busy week ahead of us in terms of new releases.
Yeah, so
Anything coming
obviously
out next
the
week?
big release, the big release for next week that we'll be talking about is the newest Like a Dragon game, which is coming out on January 26th. So, we'll be talking about that game into the microphone the day after it officially comes out. And then it doesn't really slow down from there. We've got Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Persona 3 Reload, and a bunch of other
I
stuff
can't.
going into February.
I can't say what game yet, but I did actually have a preview event that I attended this week that I'll be able to talk about on next week's podcast. So yeah, that should be fun.
All right, yeah. Sometimes we go into the week not sure what we're going to be talking about. Like I wasn't 100% sure we were going to be talking about Dragon's Dogma this week, but next week we kind of know what we're going to be talking about. So look forward to that. Please tune in.
That's right. Tune in for
you.
Yonder Night in Birth 2 at Tekken 8 discussion. That's right.
Yes,
There you go.
let's go.
Chow's like, I'll
Josh,
I'll leave
are you
Tekken
getting
8.
Josh? Are you getting Under Night on PC or PlayStation?
I don't fucking know if I'm getting any fighting game. I'm thinking about it, but I'm like, dude, there's like so many big ass RPGs as well.
Nobody gets a fighting game on PlayStation unless they have to, like I do.
Yeah. If I were to get any of the fighting games, they would be on a PC. It wouldn't be on PlayStation at all. But I keep playing this Tekken 8 demo, so I don't know, man.
Look, I only got Grand Blue on the PlayStation because I needed those codes, and I would
Yep.
You
still
needed them.
absolutely.
Needed them.
Every time Charles says that, I always just think of the fucking dried out SpongeBob saying, "I need it." That's all I
You know
can
what I
think
feel
of.
like when I try to ask for these codes? I feel like that meme with that Pepega being like knocked down, and with with like the fries and the burgers on the
Okay.
ground, and there's like these two girls looking down on him. I feel like that kind of has
I
these
feel bad
codes.
because I exactly know what you're talking about. I know the image. Fucking hell.
Well, to all of our listeners, thank you so much for listening to the episode of the Tetracast. You can follow RPG Site on all the social media networks. Just search for RPG Site on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You should be able to find us. Our Discord is discord.gg/RPG Site. And then obviously our website, rpgsite.net. And we will be back next week with another episode of the Tetracast. So thank you all so much for listening. Until next time, stay safe and take care. We'll talk to y'all later.
The wealth will be infinite next time.